Today's video is primarily geared towards skeptics because the story I'm going to tell you today is often cited as proof that we are not alone in this universe, that aliens exist. So, take a listen to the story, and at the end, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and I will respond to as many people as I can. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come out for a fun night on the town with you, but don't show up and don't answer any of their phone calls or text messages all night. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the afternoon of June 6th, 1980, a 56-year-old man named Zygmunt Adamski, who just went by Ziggy, was having a late lunch with his wife and his cousin inside of Ziggy's little brick house in the English village of Tingley. That day had been a particularly stressful day for Ziggy and his family because the following day was Ziggy's goddaughter's wedding, and Ziggy was very close with his goddaughter. Ziggy and his wife couldn't have kids because of medical issues, and so his goddaughter had basically become, at least in Ziggy's mind, like his own daughter. And so in fact, at her wedding, Ziggy was going to be walking her down the aisle. And while Ziggy was really excited about this, he was also very stressed out that he was going to screw it up, and so he had gone over and over, what responsibilities he had as part of the wedding party, and he had this little speech he had to give that he had rehearsed 50 times, he had it written out. I mean, he was ready, but he was very much in his own head about something potentially going wrong that he would be responsible for. And on top of that stress, Ziggy had gotten into a fight that day with his cousin because he felt like the cousin was being kind of disrespectful in some way to his goddaughter, and so Ziggy had stepped up and defended his goddaughter to his cousin, and so there was this undercurrent of tension at the lunch table, not to mention this overarching stress that Ziggy was under about this wedding. And so as Ziggy and his cousin and his wife have this kind of tense meal, Ziggy suddenly realizes that he forgot to get potatoes when he went to the store earlier to buy ingredients for this meal, and for some reason, Ziggy decides, you know what, I'm gonna just put my stuff down now, go to the store, and get those potatoes, even though at this point it was too late to make the potatoes for the meal, and so maybe Ziggy just wanted to go out and do anything to get away from his cousin for a minute and away from all this wedding planning they were doing and just kind of go out and clear his head. And so Ziggy put his napkin down on the table, he stood up, he told his cousin and wife that he was going out to get potatoes. They were like, okay, and the cousin actually said, do you want me to come with you? Is there anything else you need to get while you're out? And Ziggy said, nope, I'm good. He grabbed some cash out of his wallet and he headed out the door. The village of Tingley, where Ziggy and his wife lived, was a very safe place. He and his wife had actually moved there after fleeing from Poland during World War II, where both Ziggy and his wife, whose name was Lottie, had been held prisoner at some point. And so after all this trauma of being held prisoner and having to flee their home country, they had looked for the safest, best place to kind of resettle and stay for good, and Tingley was it, and they loved it. Ziggy had gotten a job in Tingley as a coal miner, and he had been doing that for 27 years. As for Lottie, she didn't work because she had a disease called multiple sclerosis, which meant she was confined to a wheelchair. But Ziggy and Lottie had quickly made lots of friends in town who were very supportive, and so it wasn't long before Ziggy and Lottie had a very happy and stable life in this town. The little shop where Ziggy was going to was only about 3 blocks away from his house, which meant walking to the store, getting potatoes, and coming back would only take a few minutes. And so Lottie and the cousin back home, they expected to see Ziggy really come back within 10-15 minutes. But when he didn't, and after about 30 minutes went by, Lottie actually got really concerned because Ziggy was just not the type of person to do stuff unannounced. He was incredibly methodical, he was very punctual and reliable, and so being late from this little trip to the store was just so uncharacteristic that Lottie told the cousin, hey, you go to the store and see if Ziggy is there, see what's going on here. Ziggy had worked in the coal mine for nearly 30 years, and he had some serious lung issues from breathing in all of the coal, and so Lottie was thinking, maybe he collapsed or something along the way from these breathing issues. But when the cousin got to the shop owner told the cousin that they had seen Ziggy. He had come in about 25 minutes earlier, he had bought a bag of potatoes, seemed totally normal, everything was fine, and he had left, walking back in the direction of his home. And so the cousin thanked the shopkeeper and then left and began jogging back towards Ziggy's house, thinking, maybe he had just not seen him on the way, that maybe Ziggy was sitting down somewhere on this 3-block path. But the cousin got all the way home and didn't see any sign of Ziggy. And so after going back inside of the house, the cousin and Lottie talked about what they should do, and they actually went back out into the neighborhood asking around, asking neighbors and other people if they had seen Ziggy. But after a couple of hours of canvassing the neighborhood and not finding Ziggy or finding any indication of what happened to him, Lottie ended up calling the police. But the police were not inclined to launch a huge investigation for a grown man who's only been missing for a couple of hours in his neighborhood with no sign of foul play or any other sign that anything really bad had happened. And after the police began asking questions of Lottie and the neighbors about what Ziggy's life was like, they learned that recently Ziggy had been declined for an early retirement from the coal mine. Because of those breathing issues he was having, he had requested to retire now, but they said no. And so Ziggy was really upset about that. He was really stressed about this wedding of his goddaughter the next day. He had been fighting with his cousin. Also, Ziggy was basically taking care of his wife, who's in this wheelchair all the time. And so because of all these stressors in Ziggy's life, the police started to wonder if maybe it was possible that Ziggy had not been going to get potatoes, but in fact was just kind of abandoning his family. And so ultimately, on the day that Ziggy went missing, the police told Lottie and Ziggy's cousin that they should just sit tight, see if he comes back tonight, and if he doesn't, go to the wedding tomorrow, because Ziggy is so close with the goddaughter. If he's having some sort of issue right now, he's very likely to come back for something as significant as this wedding. And so Lottie and Ziggy's cousin stayed at the house all night. Ziggy did not come back. They didn't hear from him. And the next day they went to the wedding, but Ziggy didn't show up for that either, even though he's supposed to walk his goddaughter down the aisle. And so after coming back from this wedding, Lottie called the police, she called local hospitals, she talked to all of her neighbors. I mean, she really put out like an all-points bulletin to everybody in the area that something terrible has happened to Ziggy and we need to find him. But despite police beginning to lean into this and her neighbors really going out in force to try to find Ziggy, no one could find him. He had just vanished. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. Back in 2017, when I left the military, I really struggled to reintegrate back into society. But ironically, I didn't know I was struggling. I just assumed that the random bouts of anger and frustration and general dysphoria that I was feeling all the time were totally normal, and everybody else was dealing with these things too. It wasn't until my family came to me and said, "John, we're really worried about you," that I finally kind of looked inward and realized there was an issue, and so I went out and got help. I got a therapist. And honestly, it changed my life. And now, today, in 2023, even though I would consider myself to be very well adjusted and happy, I still see a therapist because maintaining your mental health is just as important as maintaining your physical health. So if you are struggling right now, you're kind of caught in your own head and you're open to therapy, consider giving BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a highly reviewed online therapy platform, which means you can get the help you need right from the comfort of your own home. Get matched with a BetterHelp therapist after filling out a brief survey, and then it's up to you how you communicate, whether that's through text or chat or a phone call or video call or some combination. And if at any time you want to change your therapist, it's free and easy to do so. Go to our sponsor, betterhelp.com/MrBallen for 10% off your first month of therapy with BetterHelp and get matched with a therapist who will listen and help. On the morning of June 11th, so 5 days after Ziggy went to get potatoes and then vanished, a man named Trevor Parker got to work at his father's coal yard in the English town of Todmorden. The coal yard was basically just this big open lot that had a chain link fence around it that butted up against some railroad tracks. And inside of this lot were just these huge mounds of coal up against the perimeter of the lot. And then also inside of the coal yard was one small office building. And so on this morning, when Trevor pulled through the gates of this coal yard, first of all, he could see the entire yard the second he went in. And as he looked out, all he noticed was the fact that everything was wet from an early morning storm. And so after just kind of surveying around the lot to make sure none of the coal got blown around from the storm, he made his way to the small office building to do some paperwork. Trevor would work inside of that office building for a while, and then around lunchtime, Trevor decided to just go and get some lunch and kind of have a nice long lunch break. And so he left, he went to the pub, he was there for a couple of hours, and then around 3:45 p.m., he came back to the coal yard, and when he went through the gates, everything looked the same, except there was this dark thing on top of one of the coal piles in the back of the yard. Now, Trevor didn't know if he had seen it when he had first arrived that morning or if it was new, but whatever it was on this pile, it immediately caught Trevor's attention. And so after parking his vehicle, Trevor began walking over to this 12-foot tall coal pile with this thing on it. And when he got about 30 feet away from it, he realized he saw someone's shoe, that this dark figure was a person. And right away, Trevor started rolling his eyes because there was a group of homeless people that lived near the railroad tracks just outside of the coal yard. And it wasn't uncommon for them to get really drunk and then wander their way into the coal yard where sometimes they would fall asleep. And so Trevor's thinking, okay, clearly one of these drunk homeless people has found their way into the coal yard and they've passed out on top of this pile of coal. And so instead of going over and talking to this person directly, Trevor just turned around, went back inside of the office building, and he called for an ambulance. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. They did not have their sirens on. They didn't come flying into the yard. This was a routine thing they were doing. They were scooping up a drunk and bringing them back to the hospital. And so when the medics got out of their ambulance and Trevor directed them over to the proper coal pile, they were just cracking jokes along the way. This was not a big deal. When the two medics got to the bottom of the coal pile, one of them began climbing up the coal to go see this drunk person and get them down. And so Trevor, as this is happening, he walked a little bit closer, and when he did, he realized that the person who had fallen asleep on the coal, they had really nice pants on, like tailored pants. They were certainly not what Trevor expected this person to be wearing. But before Trevor could even really react to the clothes this person had on, the medic who had climbed up had finally reached this person. They reached down and began trying to move the person around. And suddenly, when they had manipulated this person's body enough, the medic's facial expression completely changed. They went from somewhat routine to totally horrified, and they backed off of this person on the coals. They turned around and ran down the coal, practically falling over themselves. And when they got down there, Trevor heard the medic say to his partner, call the police right now. And Trevor said, what's going on? What did you see? And the medic who had reacted that way just shook his head and walked away to kind of compose himself. And so Trevor at this point was starting to get spooked himself. Clearly, whatever the medic had just seen had really shaken him up. And so Trevor just kind of stood there while the other medic ran in and called police. And then a few minutes later, a police car came flying into the coal yard, and an officer named Alan Godfrey, along with his partner, got out of the car. And right away, the medic who had gone to the top of the pile and been freaked out by what he saw walked over with a very ashen face, and he told Alan Godfrey that something was terribly wrong with the person on top of this pile. And so Alan, not really sure what to expect, walked over with his partner to this coal pile, and with the medics and Trevor standing back, Alan, on his own, climbed up the coal, and he looked down at this person. And what Alan saw was a man lying on his stomach wearing a beautiful three-piece brown suit. And Alan immediately noticed that there was absolutely no soot from the coal that this guy was laying on his suit, even though Alan, just to get up here, had basically covered himself in black soot. And so he was wondering, how did this guy get up here and not get covered in soot? It didn't make any sense. Also, Alan noticed that this guy's hair looked totally bizarre. It looked like someone had given him like a really bad haircut with dull scissors, like they just grabbed tufts of his hair and kind of chopped randomly. I mean, his hair was kind of all over the place, there were bald spots, and then as Alan looked from this guy's hair down, he noticed almost hidden in his hairline was this fairly deep wound in the back of his neck that was still bleeding, but there was this weird green jelly-like substance very obviously placed over this wound, and Alan had no idea what the substance was. But as weird as all that was, that didn't explain why the first medic had basically completely panicked and run away. When Alan tried to roll this guy over onto his back to try to wake him up and see if he was okay, he rolled him over, and Alan got a look at this guy's face. And immediately Alan let go of him and kind of had to step back for a second, because the guy's face was contorted in this frozen look of absolute terror. His jaw was open so wide, it was almost like his lower jaw was dislocated, and his teeth were baring, and his eyes were bulging out of his head. And so Alan quickly realized that obviously this was not just some drunk homeless person who passed out here. This was a dead person, and whatever happened to them must have been unbelievably terrifying to leave someone looking like that in their death pose. It would turn out this deceased man in the coal yard was Ziggy Adamski. But this did not solve the mystery of what happened to Ziggy 5 days earlier. In fact, his discovery really only created more questions. This town where this coal yard was, Todmorden, was located 25 miles away from where Ziggy lived. And as far as anyone knew, Ziggy didn't know anybody in Todmorden, so there was no reason for him to be there. And number two, when he had left to go get potatoes, he had been on foot. So did he walk 25 miles to this random town? Also, assuming he did just walk to this coal yard, this coal yard is a big, wide open lot that if you were standing anywhere near it, even outside the fence, you could look in and basically see the entire place. So it just seemed really unlikely that Ziggy could just walk into this very public open space and get to the top of one of these coal piles without somebody noticing him, whether that was Trevor or one of the other employees that were there, or one of the truck drivers that were in and out of there all the time, all day, doing deliveries, or the homeless people who were near the railroad tracks, or the people who rode the trains that passed by there every single day. I mean, there are a lot of eyes on this coal yard, but nobody saw Ziggy. It was like he just kind of appeared at the top of this pile. And again, even if Ziggy had managed to slip in and sneak to the top of this pile, why didn't he have soot from the coal all over his clothes? And if maybe he had been brought there, if someone had killed him and put him on this coal pile, there's even more reason he would have soot all over him, because they would have had to drag him up to the top of the pile. And even putting all that aside, if someone really did kill Ziggy and they placed him on this pile, why? This is a very open public place. Someone is going to find him. You're going to get caught if you're the killer. And then, of course, there is the issue of what Ziggy was wearing. That brown three-piece suit he was wearing that had no soot on it, it wasn't his, and it wasn't put on right. The buttons were not lined up. It almost looked like somebody else who didn't know how to put a suit on had tried to dress Ziggy. And then Ziggy also did not have an undershirt on. It was just the jacket over his skin. And then also Ziggy had this totally bizarre haircut that looked like someone who didn't know how to give a haircut had cut his hair with scissors and said, good enough. And then, of course, you have this wound on the back of Ziggy's neck. Now, the wound itself was determined not to be fatal. It was a fairly deep cut, but it wouldn't have killed him. However, the most significant part of that wound was that green jelly that had been placed across the back of it. During Ziggy's autopsy, they were unable to figure out what this green jelly was, and they ran dozens and dozens of tests on it. And also, during the autopsy, the coroner would determine that Ziggy had actually died the same day he had been found. So he was doing something for 5 days between going missing and being on this coal pile, but nobody knows what it was. And as for his cause of death, the coroner was not entirely sure, but it did seem like he died of a heart attack. The coroner would search all of Ziggy's body for signs of some sort of fight he might have gotten into, some sort of defensive wound on his body, but there was nothing. However, the coroner did find there were very small burns on the back of his neck that were caused by acid, but it was unclear how those got there. When they inspected Ziggy's stomach, they determined that he had been eating and drinking regularly, and so he was not malnourished, he was not dehydrated. He was relatively healthy when he died. He just had this heart attack for unknown reasons, and apparently whatever gave him the heart attack scared him so badly, his face contorted in that horrible way. Ultimately, the coroner just kind of gave up and ruled that Ziggy had died of natural causes, and then the case was closed. But to this day, no one really has any idea how Ziggy went from going out to get groceries to winding up 25 miles away, dressed differently, with this haircut, with this jelly on him and acid burns, dead with this horrible look on his face on this coal pile. It doesn't make any sense. This case has become very famous because people say it is the best example of alien abduction. That Ziggy had left his house to get groceries, got abducted by aliens, and then over 5 days, these aliens did stuff to Ziggy, including cutting into his neck and dropping acid on him, and then they put that green stuff on the back of his neck. They dressed him the way they thought people dressed, in the suit, but they didn't really do it right, and then they literally just dropped him on top of this coal pile, which would explain why he didn't have soot all over him. He was dead, they dropped him, and he just landed on the top of the coal pile. And even if you think that's totally far-fetched, keep in mind, still today, we do not know what that green jelly compound was on the back of his neck. It's literally never been identified, and people have been trying to figure it out for 40 plus years. Also, it's worth noting that one of the responding police officers, Alan Godfrey, claimed to have seen a UFO within weeks of finding Ziggy Adamski. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode, be sure to check out our podcast called the MrBallen Podcast, where we have literally hundreds more stories just like this one, many of which are only on the podcast. Again, it's called the MrBallen Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music. Today, I'm going to share 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I will share the photo that is famously associated with that story. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer to give the like button acupuncture, but then after you put in all the needles in their back and you stick the moxa to the end of the needles and you light those, just leave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Just after 6 p.m. on December 27th, 2015, a woman named Sarah Robinson was getting ready inside of her cabin on the 7th floor of a massive cruise ship. She and her boyfriend were going to dinner that night with Sarah's parents in one of the restaurants on board the ship. And in fact, this entire trip, this whole vacation, was actually a big gift from Sarah's parents to Sarah and her boyfriend. And so far, the trip had been totally amazing. I mean, all 4 of them, Sarah, her boyfriend, and Sarah's parents, had got to go swimming and drink great drinks and have great food, and it was just like a total dream. But now they only had 1 night left, tonight, and they wanted to make the most of it. And their plan was to go to the big buffet that the ship offered and just totally indulge on the amazing food and just have some laughs, share stories, and then the next day they'd wake up in the Florida port that they left from, and the trip would be over. But for now, they had this 1 dinner left. And so, after Sarah and her boyfriend were all ready, they left their cabin and they met Sarah's parents out in the hallway, and then Sarah led the way towards the stairwell that would bring them up to the 10th floor where the restaurant was that they were going to. Once they reached the 10th floor, Sarah could see right in front of her the entrance to this restaurant. And so she, her boyfriend, and her parents, all behind her, began walking towards the restaurant. And to get there, they would have to walk past this sort of lobby right in front of the restaurant, where there was this elevator bank that would go down to the lobby and all the other floors. And so, Sarah and her family, they walked past these elevators, and as they did, Sarah began to hear what sounded like rain hitting the outside of the ship. But that didn't make any sense because that whole day, the weather had been beautiful and clear. And Sarah, when she heard this sound, she instinctively kind of looked around the corner out one of the windows, and she looked out into the night, and it was still clear and beautiful out. So this could not be rain. And so Sarah, she turned around and she looked at her boyfriend and her parents with a sort of quizzical look, being like, do you hear this? Like, what is that sound? And they clearly had heard it too, and were looking back at her like, I don't know. But before they could even start to discuss whatever this was, a woman who they didn't know, who was standing near these elevators as well, began to scream. It would turn out just a few minutes before this woman began to scream, the cruise ship's chief electrician, 66-year-old Jose Sandoval Opazo, had begun doing routine maintenance on the elevators that were located a few floors below the 10th floor, but still within that same elevator bank that could bring you up to the 10th floor where that restaurant was. And while Jose was performing this very routine and quick maintenance on the elevator, something strange happened. But to understand why this happened, you need to understand a little bit about Jose and the other electricians on board this cruise ship. So there was oftentimes a lot of very quick and easy maintenance that would need to get done on these elevators, which would involve going into the elevator shaft to do it. But again, these are very short bursts, in and out, very easy to do. All the electricians know how to do it. And the procedure was to actually fully shut down that elevator, like completely, and then go inside and do the maintenance, and then go through the process of starting the elevator all over again. But that was so disruptive to the flow of traffic on the ship each day, and it was just kind of a hassle. And so Jose and the other electricians had come up with this sort of workaround that didn't require them to shut down the elevator, because again, that was just a huge pain and they didn't want to do it. And so what they would do is they would wait until the elevator car within the shaft they needed to do maintenance on was at some other level, like on floor 2, and they would go into the elevator on like floor 8 and then quickly do the maintenance on the inside of the shaft or whatever it is they had to do. Or sometimes they would actually have to do repairs on the elevator car itself, in which case they would just kind of go in real quick, do the repairs, get out again. But all of it was predicated on just kind of knowing where the elevator car was in the shaft and being really quick, in and out. And so Jose and the other electricians had done this many times and there was no issues. But on this day, Jose, he got into the elevator shaft to make these simple repairs. And so he actually was standing inside of the shaft on top of the elevator car that was down, a few levels down from 10. And he began making these repairs. And suddenly the car lurched into action, because a guest unknowingly had walked into the elevator car and pressed floor 10. And so Jose is on this elevator car that starts moving, and before he can even figure out what's going on, the little opening that he used, the kind of service entrance into the shaft, had been covered up by the elevator car. And so his exit was now gone, and he was now relatively slowly moving up the shaft. Now, Jose would have no idea when this car was going to stop, but if it went to the top, he'd get crushed, and he knew it. And so in kind of a moment of panic, Jose attempted to step to the side to somehow go between the wall and the elevator. It was like he had nowhere to go and he knew it, and he just took that path. But there was an inch of space between the wall and the car. And so the second he did that, the car kept going and it sucked him down into that space and just destroyed him. And so by the time this elevator car reached its destination, the 10th floor, and that guest got off the elevator car, by this point, Jose's body had been totally destroyed, and all of his blood was dripping down the elevator shaft, splattering into the walls and hitting the ground, and it sounded like rain hitting the outside of the ship. And so that's what Sarah and her family were hearing. And then the reason that woman started screaming is she was the first one who turned and saw all this blood coming down the front of the elevator doors. Medics would arrive quickly on the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Jose was deceased. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. Back in 2017, I was really struggling with my mental health. I had just left the military after almost a decade of service, and I was just really struggling to reintegrate into society, and it was making me totally depressed. Now, I had a great support system around me. I had my wife, my kids, my parents, my siblings, friends, but I had such dark thoughts and feelings. I just didn't feel comfortable sharing them with people I loved. I was worried it would kind of upset them, and they'd also view me differently in a negative way, which, by the way, this is a very common train of thought amongst people who are feeling depressed. So I didn't realize how common it was, but there you go. Lots of people feel this way, and I did too. However, even though I didn't tell my family or friends anything, they eventually picked up that something was wrong with me, and they actually approached me and said, look, I really think you need to see someone. I think you need to see a therapist. And honestly, I was ready for that help, and so I did seek out a therapist. And my goodness, unburdening myself of all that horrible darkness inside of me to a trained, neutral third party was so cathartic. And of course, therapy is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but if you're really struggling right now and you're kind of holding it all in, you really ought to give therapy a try. And a really easy entry into therapy is BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a highly reviewed online therapy platform, which means you can get the help you need right from the comfort of your own home. All you have to do is fill out a short survey online, and then within about 48 hours, you get paired up with a licensed therapist, and then it's up to you how you communicate and how often. Also, you can change your therapist at any time for no additional cost. Let BetterHelp connect you with a therapist who can support you all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/MrBallen or select MrBallen during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. At around 2 p.m. on September 24th, 2017, a 17-year-old college student named Sanjay climbed up onto this boulder that was right off to the side of this hiking trail that he was on. Sanjay was on a day trip with about 20 of his friends from college, and they were in this part of southern India that was really famous for its long, winding trails and all these boulders that kind of sat off to the side of the trails. And then at the end of these trails that are in this part of India is this beautiful ancient Hindu temple that a lot of people will go and take pictures in front of and go inside of. And so that was where Sanjay and his friends were ultimately headed, was this temple. And from the boulder that Sanjay had just climbed up on, he looked up the trail, and from his view now, which was now slightly higher, he could actually see just barely the top of this temple. And so he was really excited about going to see it, and he couldn't believe how close they were. But as he was standing on this boulder, staring at the top of the temple, he also realized that kind of off to the side of the temple, basically right next to it, was this beautiful pool of water with a big wall around it and cement steps leading into it. I mean, it kind of looked like a swimming pool. And so because Sanjay and his friends had been hiking all day to this point, and it was really hot out, Sanjay really liked the idea of going swimming. And so he actually jumped off the boulder and just started running towards the temple and this pool. And he was yelling to his friends as he did, like, hey, I'm going to go swimming. And so he ran, not to the temple, but to this random pool of water that was next to it. And he got to the steps and he immediately took off his shirt and he pulled his phone out of his pocket and he put it on the steps. And then he walked his way into the water and turned around, hoping to see his friends coming after him. And sure enough, all of his friends were smiling and laughing and running after him, ripping their shirts off, putting their phones down and jumping in too. And so pretty soon, this very quiet, peaceful pool next to this temple was packed full of very rowdy and crazy college kids. Now, to be clear, this pool of water was not intended to be a swimming area. It was dug about 300 years earlier for this temple, and many people began to view this pool of water as sacred because they believed it could cure diseases. And so what Sanjay and his friends were doing was totally taboo and not allowed. But I can promise you, Sanjay and his friends did not care. They were having a great time. And in fact, Sanjay was having such a great time that when he turned around and looked back up the steps they'd all charged in on, he saw one of his friends, whose name was Vishwas, was standing up out of the water reading what looked like a plaque about this pool of water. And Sanjay hated the idea of one of their buddies not getting to experience this fun. And so Sanjay, a little out of pocket, yelled out to Vishwas like, hey, stop reading that and get in the water. Let's go. What are you doing? And Vishwas was obviously kind of embarrassed to be called out so publicly in front of the, 19 other kids that were there. They're all looking up at him expectantly now, like, yeah, get in here, man. And Vishwas, he's like, okay, fine. And so he took off his shirt, put his phone down as well, and he got in the water with all of them. And very shortly after he did that, Sanjay kind of forgot about him and decided, hey, this would be a great time to take a photo of everybody here, memorialize this amazing trip. And so Sanjay, he waded over to the steps, he grabbed his phone, he came back towards the group, and, he's looking at this big rowdy crowd of his friends who are totally not paying attention to him. And he's saying, hey guys, come over here. I want to take your photo, gather up. I'll take a photo of all of us. And so it took a couple of minutes, but eventually, all these kids got in frame, and Sanjay, he held the phone out, made sure everybody was there, and they all smiled, and he took a picture. And then after he took the picture, Sanjay put his phone back on the steps and returned to just splashing and goofing around with his friends. About an hour later, Sanjay and his friends had left the pool and were now in the temple and were just walking around exploring. But eventually, Sanjay just got tired of looking inside the temple. It was not very interesting to him. And so he eventually just went outside again and sat down on this low wall that was right outside the temple. And because he knew his friends would not be done for at least, 15 or 20 minutes or so, he just pulled out his phone and began kind of scrolling through social media and, doing what we all do on our phones. But eventually, Sanjay opened up his photo album to look at all the photos he had taken during the hike in, and then also that picture in the pool, and then also some pictures he took inside of the temple. And so he pulls up his pictures and just kind of starts scrolling through them, and he eventually reaches the photo that he took, selfie style, in the pool with all of his friends together. And so he opens that picture up and he looks at it and he smiles because it definitely was the best picture he took. He got all his buddies in frame. Everybody seemed so happy. But as Sanjay was looking at this photo, he realized there was something odd about it. There was just something in this photo that just seemed like it shouldn't be. And as he looked more closely at it, the smile on his face faded and he began to panic just a little bit. He didn't know if what he was looking at was real or not, but he knew he had to go find out. And so Sanjay put his phone away and he looked up and began looking around outside the temple at all the other people who had left, and many of them included his friends. And they were walking around, talking in groups or whatever. And Sanjay, he began looking at all of his friends and he would stare at their faces. He was looking for something, but he didn't see what he was looking for. And so after scanning the entire outside and not feeling satisfied, Sanjay got up and speed walked back into the temple and began going into each and every room, looking at every single person he encountered. And when he would find one of his friends, he would stare at their face. And when he didn't find what he was looking for, he just kept on going to every single room until finally he reached the last room of the temple and he found the last of his friends and he looked at their faces and still he did not see what he was looking for. And so now Sanjay is truly panicked. He's actually horrified at this point. He runs back outside and he finds their college professor who had come along to sort of chaperone the trip. And he ran up to this professor and he pulled out his phone. He opened up that photo of them in the pool and he showed the professor what he had found. And Sanjay pointed out the strange thing about this photo. And so the professor, he began looking at the photo too. And right away, he also could see this very strange thing that seemed very out of place. And so the professor asked Sanjay a few follow-up questions, about like what Sanjay had done since discovering this. And after Sanjay said, I've been all over the temple, I still can't figure it out. And so the professor knew the police would have to get involved. And so the professor got in touch with police. And so the police came out to the temple not long after that. And the students, so Sanjay and all of his friends, had been instructed to stay right by the temple. Do not go down to the pool, stay up here, let the police handle it. And so when the police came in, they came running by the group, and Sanjay and his friends were just kind of watching anxiously, waiting to see what happens. And then as the officers went down to the pool, from where Sanjay and his friends were standing, they actually did not have a clear view. The temple itself blocked their view, so they could not see the pool, but they could hear what the officers were doing. And at first, as Sanjay and his friends are standing there really nervously, they don't hear anything down at the pool. But then they hear one of the officers shout something out, like he's found something. And then Sanjay and his friends heard all this splashing as clearly officers were jumping into the pool. And it was at this moment when Sanjay heard that splashing that he knew the thing he saw in this photo, it had to be real. As horrible as that was, it had to be real. The reason why Sanjay's friend, Vishwas, was not in the water with everybody else, why he was up reading that plaque about the history of this pool, was because Vishwas did not know how to swim, but he didn't tell anyone. Nobody knew this. And so he was probably kind of embarrassed about it. And so maybe he was reading this plaque as sort of a way to, act distracted, like the plaque is the reason he's not swimming. But then when Sanjay, who meant no harm by this, but he yelled out to Vishwas, "Hey, come on, dude, get in here. Come swimming with us." Because he did it so publicly in front of all the other friends, it seems like Vishwas felt very pressured into getting into the water. And that's what he did. Instead of telling anybody that he could not swim, he just kind of shrugged, took off his shirt, pulled his phone out of his pocket, put it on the ground, and waded into the water. And as soon as he did, the entire group just kind of went back to goofing around and splashing and being totally chaotic. And then when Sanjay was like, "Hey, let's take that photo," he really did manage to get all of his friends in frame somehow, except one of them was Vishwas, and you can only see the top of his head. It's because he was drowning in the background of that photo, just nobody knew it. And so obviously an hour later, when Sanjay's looking at this photo, he sees the top of Vishwas's head and he's like, wait a minute, is he goofing around or is he drowning? And then he ran all around the temple looking for Vishwas. He wanted to prove that he was not in the pool still, that he was up here. But then after searching the entire area and not finding Vishwas, he went to his professor, they called the police, and the discovery was made. And unfortunately, by the time police pulled Vishwas out of the water, he was already deceased. Late on the morning of June 27th, 1957, a 25-year-old Austrian mountain climber named Kurt Diemberger plunged his ice axe into the deep snow ahead of him and then used the axe to pull himself up and over a big ice clump. Kurt was totally physically and mentally exhausted by this point and only wanted to stop for like 2 seconds just to catch his breath. But he knew that was just not an option. Kurt and his climbing partner, a 32-year-old man named Herman Buell, were climbing one of the tallest mountains in the world, called Chogalisa, which is located in northern Pakistan. And they were doing this climb all alone. It was just those two, and they had virtually no safety equipment. Now, for reference, this was not normal. Anybody who climbed Chogalisa did so with Sherpas and guides and oxygen masks. I mean, this was a dangerous climb, and so serious measures had to be taken to ensure it was safe. But Kurt and Herman felt like, that takes all the fun out of mountain climbing. There has to be, like real risk here for this to be worth doing. And also, critically, Kurt and Herman were well aware of the fact that if they successfully climbed Chogalisa with no safety equipment, so what they were planning to do, that would be a new world record because nobody had ever done that before on this mountain. And so that felt like a really cool reason to go for this. And when they began their journey a few days earlier, when they began the climb, it had still felt like a great idea because the weather forecast was perfect for the rest of the time they expected to be on the mountain. However, earlier that morning, Kurt had turned around to talk to Herman, and he noticed off to the south was a kind of ominous dark cloud making its way toward them. Now, obviously, when you're on the ground and you look up and you see a dark cloud, you think, okay, it might storm, or it's actively storming. Maybe it's rain, maybe it's snow, but it's probably not a big deal unless it's like a tsunami or a hurricane or something, but dark clouds are just not really a big deal. But when you are 4 miles up one of the most treacherous mountains in the world, you got no other people with you, you got no safety equipment, and you see a dark cloud coming your way, yeah, that's terrifying. Because storms have been killing mountain climbers basically for as long as mountain climbing has been a thing. And so when Kurt and Herman saw this cloud, even though the weather forecast had been good, they knew that there was a real chance a storm was going to hit them before they reached the summit. And so they had to make a choice. Abort the mission now, go back to camp, and potentially give up on this climb altogether, thereby not getting the world record. Or they could risk it and just try to speed their way up to the summit before the storm arrived. And because Kurt and Herman were actually within about 1,000 feet to the summit when Kurt noticed this dark cloud, they decided, you know what, let's just risk it. We can get up there to the summit, get this thing done before this cloud ever gets to us. And so that was the decision they made. And it was also why Kurt and Herman knew there was no way they could slow down even for a second, because basically this was a sprint to the top. And if they slowed down, they might die. And so, panting and exhausted with the wind whipping up like mad, Kurt and Herman just kept moving up that mountain as fast as they possibly could. But when they got about maybe 500 feet away from the summit, so they're really close at this point, something changed. As Kurt was about to bring his axe back down into the snow to, pull himself up one more step, he suddenly realized he couldn't see the mountain in front of him. Like there was nothing. It was just pure white all around him. He couldn't even see the sky. It was like he was just in this void all of a sudden. And the reason for this is because that dark cloud had caught up to them. They were literally inside of the cloud. That's why they couldn't see anything. And so from behind Kurt, even though he can't see anything, he could hear Herman desperately screaming up to him, "Hey, we gotta turn around right now!" And Kurt obviously knew, yeah, it's too late. We are not gonna make the summit. We gotta go. Kurt knew Herman was right. I mean, this is an absolute crisis. If the storm that's basically brewing all around them didn't kill them, certainly the result of the storm would. I mean, all the snow that's going to land is going to fill in their tracks, and it would be nearly impossible to find your way back down again. And so this was like, we totally miscalculated, turn around and get out of here as fast as possible. And so that's what Kurt and Herman began to do. As fast as they could, they began going down the mountain, following along their tracks they had left on the way up. And pretty quickly, Kurt and Herman began making serious progress. And so Kurt was starting to feel optimistic that, maybe they had managed to escape this just in time. But right at that moment, the ground underneath Kurt began to vibrate. Then Kurt looked down, and even though his visibility was basically nothing, he could tell from his legs that the ground was basically shifting underneath him. And then suddenly Kurt felt this feeling that you get when you're on like a carnival ride and you're dropped, that feeling in your stomach that you're falling. He got that because the ground underneath him just gave way. It was an avalanche. And so in absolute desperation, Kurt, who knows he's about to be sucked into an avalanche, he just jumped, like as far away from the mountain as he possibly could, kind of at an angle to the right, like he was leaping up and out of the avalanche and over to the right. But you got to remember, he's on this really steep slope. This is not like jumping on flat ground where you jump up and just return to where you jumped from. He's on a slope. So when he jumped out and to the right, it was like he was jumping off a building. He fell something like 30 or so feet before he hit the ground again. But when Kurt hit the ground, he kind of expected to be gobbled up by the snow and keep being sucked down the mountain, but he wasn't. He hit the ground and didn't move. And then he kind of sat up and he looked around and he realized he had successfully jumped out of the avalanche. He had done it. He saved himself. And so he began looking around. The visibility is still terrible, but it's a little bit better because now the avalanche has basically gone down the mountain. The storm is kind of passing, and so the visibility is decent. And, Kurt, he's looking around, screaming out for Herman. He doesn't see him. And then it's like suddenly the visibility just opened up, and Kurt was able to look to his left where the avalanche had gone. And as he was looking, he saw what looked impossible. Basically, the land where they had been walking down this mountain was gone. It was like the avalanche had removed that part of the mountain. And so Kurt is basically laying in the snow on the edge of a new cliff where the avalanche had basically broken away the mountain. And so he's looking into this crevasse where the avalanche went and thinking, I can't believe how lucky I am, but I gotta go find Herman. And so Kurt stands up and he's pretty battered from this 30-foot fall, but he's got adrenaline pumping through him, so he feels pretty good. And he scrambles his way 30 feet back up the mountain to this ridgeline where he originally jumped out of the avalanche, hoping when he got up there that he might find some sign of where Herman went to, because they were pretty close together when the avalanche started. But when he got up there was no sign of Herman, and he turned around and looked back down the mountain, and he couldn't see Herman anywhere. But when he turned back around, looking now back up the mountain, so in the direction of where they had originally intended to hike, and then where they had to come back down from when they were in the cloud, he noticed that he could see very easily their tracks, he and Herman's tracks. And so with his eyes, he just kind of tracked these tracks all the way down the mountain to where he was. And as he did this, he noticed something. At first, it was like his brain couldn't compute what he was seeing. But after a moment, he knew. Here is a photo of what Kurt would have seen. However, keep in mind, this was not a photo Kurt took, and it's also from a slightly farther away perspective. But conceptually, this really is what Kurt saw that told him what happened to Herman. So in this photo, you can see the mountain and the summits at the top, and there's a trail that goes straight down and then appears to diverge, where there's tracks that go to the left from our perspective, the viewer's perspective. They go to the left around that cliff line, and the other set of footprints that disappear off the cliff. Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, the footprints that go to the left are Kurt's footprints. He just magically jumped and landed on the absolute edge of where this avalanche was going to happen, and Herman is the other set of prints. And so when that avalanche started, there was nowhere for Herman to go, and he was sucked into that avalanche and dragged over 1,000 feet down the mountain, and his body was never recovered. Hey everybody, if you haven't heard yet, we announced some really big news recently. We are putting out a book. and it's amazing. It's called MrBallen Presents Strange, Dark, and Mysterious, the Graphic Stories, and it's an amazing graphic novel we have been working on for over a year. And it's our very first book, so we're all very proud of this. We think it's going to be so amazing. So in this book, there are 9 stories, 5 of which are of the old variety, so you've heard them on YouTube, and they've been remastered and put into this book. And then you have 4 full-length, brand new stories, which are amazing, that have also been put inside of this book. And the way we made those 4 new stories is to have them replicate the feel of YouTube. In fact, I would say this whole book is like the written version of our YouTube channel. It's totally a throwback to our OG fans who found us on YouTube. This is the book for you. It's going to be so good. The book's not coming out until my birthday, October 1st, but you can pre-order it right now by going to book.ballenstudios.com. And also, after you pre-order, be sure to follow me on social media and all the other places that we put out content, because we're going to be teasing stuff about this book before release. Things like, sneak peeks into the book and some pieces of artwork and some behind the scenes stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but it all starts with pre-ordering that book. So again, go to book.ballenstudios.com and pre-order our first ever official book. It's going to be great. Enjoy. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's stories and you want to hear more like it, be sure to check out the MrBallen podcast, which is available on all podcast platforms. It has hundreds of stories, and many of them are only available on podcast. So if you're consuming this content only on YouTube, there is a whole world over in the podcast side of the house that you should go check out. Again, it's called the MrBallen podcast, and it's available everywhere. Wait, don't go anywhere. If you're looking for more strange, dark, and mysterious videos, click here. This story has a wild ending. It is worth sticking around for. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and chain them to the bed while they're sleeping, and then put on the far side of the room a very loud speaker and set it to play the song Boots, Boots, Boots by Rudyard Kipling on repeat for at least 48 hours. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. Goth is someone who finds beauty in things that most other people consider to be pretty dark. But most Americans tend to associate the term goth with the teenagers of the late 90s and early 2000s that wore all black and wore heavy black boots and would hang out in cemeteries. And while that representation of goth culture is, of course, limited, it is a good representation of the 2 protagonists in today's story, best friends Rachel and Molly. In the 1990s, Rachel and Molly were full-blown goths. They had black hair, black makeup, black clothes. They had the black heavy combat boots, and at one point they and their other goth friends started hanging out in a cemetery to be kind of ironic and funny, like, look at us, we're goth, we hang out in cemeteries. And then they actually enjoyed it and began hanging out in a cemetery like every weekend. One Friday night, Molly calls Rachel to go hang out in the cemetery. And as it happened, Rachel was just sitting at home and she was bored out of her mind. And so the call came at a perfect time. And so Rachel's like, yeah, I'd love to go. So she flies downstairs and she sits on her front step and she's waiting for Molly to show up. And eventually Molly's car rolls down the street and Rachel immediately recognizes that Molly is the only one in the car. And Rachel, whenever she would go to the cemetery at night with Molly, they were always there with a group of at least 4 people. Even though they liked hanging out in the cemetery, they did recognize that it was a little bit creepy at night to be out there, and so they liked kind of rolling in a fairly big group. And so Rachel hops in the car, and her first question to Molly is, where is everybody? Are they meeting us there? And Molly said, oh no, everybody else is either working or they're kind of hungover from the party from last night, so it's just us 2. I hope that's okay. And at the time, Rachel actually in her head was like, no, I don't really want to do this anymore. But she was like, oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll just go. It's just the 2 of us. It'll be fine. Molly takes off from Rachel's house and she makes the familiar kind of winding commute to the front gate of this enormous cemetery that sits right in the center of town. They drive underneath this massive wrought iron gate that looks very medieval, very foreboding. It looks like it's out of a cheesy horror movie, this like cliche entrance to a cemetery. And so they go through there and they're on this road road that stretches all the way down through the cemetery and basically splits it in two. On the left side, as you're driving in, was an area closest to town, and also it butted up against a major public university. And then on this side of the cemetery, you had a bunch of residential houses that butted up against the side of the cemetery. And where Molly and Rachel and their crew like to go was on the right side, all the way back in the corner, because there was a section that was kind of situated between these two hills, where not only were they obscured from the cemetery road and the main road once they were down in this little depression, there was also no houses that happened to look over that spot. So it was kind of like the hidden section of the cemetery, and there was also this big boulder that people sat on and a big tree you could lean up against. So that was their spot. So Molly drives in the gates, she heads down that road and she turns right onto a dead end road. She takes that down about a couple hundred meters till it dead ends, and they park, and then the girls get out of the car, they light up cigarettes, and they walk down this hill that's just beyond where this dead end comes to an end. And so they walk down this hill, and it brings them to this clearing where this big rock and tree is. Rachel hops up on the rock and she turns around, so she's facing back up the hill they just walked down, and Molly is right next to her on her right, leaning up against the tree. And for the next hour or so, they just crushed cigarettes and talked about their various boyfriend drama and life drama and whatever else they wanted to talk about. After a while, the girls started to smell a bonfire, and from where they were sitting, they could see a hill in front of them, and there was actually another hill over here. And so their view is pretty obscured out of this little valley they're in, so they can't see any fires anywhere. And so they assumed that what they're smelling was a fire coming from the other side of the cemetery, because there's that huge university over there, and they knew sometimes the college kids would come onto the cemetery and they would light fires over there, and inevitably the police would get called and they would break up the fire, because you're not allowed to have a fire on the cemetery. And whenever they did that, the police would actually make rounds around the entire cemetery, and historically, basically, if you were there hanging out, they would tell you to leave. And so they think, okay, this is probably a good time to leave, because probably in the next 30 minutes to an hour, the police are going to be here, they're going to come over here, see our car, and they're going to ask us what we're doing, and we're going to have to leave. So let's just leave now. So Rachel hops off the rock, and the two of them begin meandering their way back up the hill towards the car. When they get about halfway up the hill, they notice to their right something bright. Now, because they were higher up, they could actually see over the hill to their right, and what they were seeing was the top of a bonfire. So the girls take a couple more steps up the hill to gain some elevation to hopefully be able to see better down into where this fire is. But even when they're up almost at the top of the hill, that fire is too far down on the other side of that hill that they can't see any people, and they can't really tell how big the fire is. They're just basically seeing the top flickers of it. Even though they don't know anything about the people over there at this fire, what they do know is when they showed up, there was no fire over there. They would have recognized it. So whoever's over there had to have shown up and built this fire while Rachel and Molly were down at the rock and tree, which means there's a pretty good chance they didn't see Rachel and Molly. This is a pretty private area. Their car was parked a little bit off to the side of the trail. And so Molly picks up on this and she says to Rachel, hey, let's sneak back down and walk up their hill and look down and see who's here. I bet it's a bunch of college kids. It'll be funny to see what they're doing. But Rachel had a weird feeling about it. She's thinking to herself, if this is college kids, why would they have their bonfire this far away from campus? I mean, this is literally the farthest point away from the side of the cemetery that's close to their campus. If they're having a party over here, there's a good chance that anybody going to it is going to need to drive. And that just doesn't make sense if you can just walk to the other side of the campus and have a bonfire over there. And so Rachel is logically deducing that this is probably not college kids. But who else is having a bonfire in the secret section of the cemetery in the middle of the night? And Rachel's thinking that now if the police come here, they're definitely going to see us because we're so close to this bonfire. And so it's probably not a good idea to stick around much longer. But despite Rachel's hesitations, she is intrigued and she does want to see what's going on over there. So the two girls walk down the hill, they make it down to the rock and the tree, then they turn left and they begin walking up this other hill, the hill that's going to bring them up to this fire. And so they only get a few steps up this hill when they are suddenly hit with this disgusting putrid smell that just encompasses them and it makes them gag, and they're covering their mouth and their nose, and Rachel exclaims, "Oh my God, what is that?" And then as soon as she says it, she realizes she was really loud, and she's like, and Molly's like, and they both freeze, wondering if the people on the other side of the hill have heard them. And after a little bit of silence, Molly's like, You want to keep going? And Rachel's like, no, we gotta go. Between the horrible smell that's obviously coming from this weird fire and the fact that Rachel basically just gave them away. And so for all we know, these people on the other side of this hill have heard us and now they're waiting for us to come over the edge, and it's gonna be really awkward if we suddenly crash their bonfire. Rachel, she's thinking about these things, and so she's like, let's go, we gotta go. Molly's disappointed, but she gets it, and the two girls turn around and begin walking back. And so they walk past the tree and the rock on their left, they turn right, and they're about to walk up the hill that's gonna bring them to their car when Rachel just turns around to look at the hill towards the fire where they were headed before. And standing at the top of that hill is a man just looking down at them. And the fire is illuminating him from behind, and they can clearly tell it's a man standing there looking at them. And immediately the girls felt really uncomfortable. It was almost like they had just been caught spying, even though they didn't actually get caught spying. It was what they were going to go do. And so they felt like they had almost been caught red-handed. And so Molly and Rachel just turn and begin walking up the hill, kind of with their heads down. They just felt kind of awkward. And so they move a few more steps up this hill, and Rachel looks again at where this guy was standing, and he's now gone. And Rachel's relieved, but then she realizes he's gone because he's walking, power walking, down the hill towards them. And Rachel gasps, and she grabs Molly and pushes her and says, go, 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 go. And they start running up the hill, and Rachel looks around, and now this guy is running towards them. He's down now at the rock and the tree. He's gaining on them. They sprint up over the top. They run to Molly's car, and Molly's fumbling with her keys to get the car open, and Rachel's yelling, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Finally, she gets it open, and they both jump inside. Rachel locks the car doors, and as Molly is turning the key over, Rachel's looking out the back, and she's waiting to see this guy. And sure enough, as they pull off, she sees his head come up over the ridgeline just enough that he can clearly see them leaving, and then he ducks back down and he disappears. And the two of them speed down the road. They make a left onto that main drive, and they speed out of the cemetery. For the first few minutes of their drive, neither of them say anything. This was just a very traumatic experience, and it was also very confusing because they thought they were going over to spy on college kids having a bonfire, and then they're hit with that horrible smell. Like, what was that horrible smell? And then they leave, and there's this guy who did not look like he was a college kid. He looked like he was probably in his 40s, and then he's chasing them. You know, like, what was that? And when they did start talking about it, they couldn't really come to any sort of rational conclusion of what had just happened. And so they were both very spooked, and they decide, let's just go home and talk about this tomorrow. And so Molly drops Rachel off at her house, and Molly goes home, and both girls go to bed. The next morning, Rachel gets up and she heads down to the kitchen where her mom is already there having her morning coffee. And Rachel sits down, and, you know, she's not a big talker. She's not about to start by saying, hey, guess what happened to me last night at the cemetery? Instead, she just sits there, and for a little bit, her mom just kind of rambles about work and what she's doing that day. And then all of a sudden, her mom, it's like she has this epiphany. And she goes, Rachel, did you hear what happened last night? And Rachel's like, no, what? And her mom's like, someone I work with. I don't know her personally, but she works in the same building as me. She got kidnapped from the parking garage where I parked my car. I have seen her park her car in this lot, and she got kidnapped. And Rachel's like, oh my God, really? Like, what happened to her? Did they find her? And her mom was like, yeah, but it was too late. The person who had kidnapped her had killed her and then tried to dispose of her body at the cemetery by burning her in a bonfire. Rachel suddenly felt sick because now she knew what was happening last night, and she knows what that smell was. Rachel immediately pours her heart out about everything that happened the night before, and her mom is totally horrified, but she's in particular horrified that they clearly had been there when the killer had arrived and set up shop and began burning this body. They were just literally 50 meters away the whole time. And so her mom tells her, you and Molly have to go to the police station and make a statement. They have not caught this person yet. You've seen this person. You got to tell them. And so Rachel calls Molly and breaks the news about what was actually happening the night before and who was actually chasing them to their car, and says, we have to go to the police station. And so they agree. They go down to the police station and they tell them what happened, but they didn't get a great look at him. They could only say that he was maybe in his 40s and maybe average height. And so the police wrote it all down, but they basically said, look, if you can think of more details, we would love to hear those because this isn't really enough to go on. And so the girls go back home and they're thinking to themselves, did he see us? Does he know that we saw him? Do you think he knows that we know he's a killer now? And so they're freaking out. But luckily, within 48 hours, the police actually caught this guy because he was driving around in the murder victim's car and someone spotted him. They pulled him over and he confessed, and so he went to jail. Needless to say, Rachel and Molly thanked their lucky stars that when they started ascending that hill and they were hit with that smell, that Rachel said, let's not go any farther. Let's leave. Because had they continued and gone to the other side, they could have wound up in the bonfire too. So that's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and tell us where you found it in the episode. Give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please sneak into the like button's house and chain them to the bed while they're sleeping, and then put a speaker on the other side of the room and have it play the song Boots, Boots, Boots by Rudyard Kipling on repeat for 24 to 48 hours. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our 3, 4, even 5 weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's just JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to show you the picture or pictures that are famously associated with that story. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please cut all the Waldos out of a Where's Waldo book and give it to the like button for their birthday. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In March of 2015, 22-year-old Sailor Gilliams and her good friend Brendan Vega, who was also 22, decided they wanted to go hiking. Now, they were both highly inexperienced hikers, so when they were looking in the area for places to go hiking, they were looking for novice trails, things that they would be able to manage. And they thought they had found one in Santa Barbara, California. And so they headed off in that direction and they took off on this particular trail. A little ways into their hike, and they started to feel like, man, the terrain here is pretty treacherous. This is way more difficult than we were expecting when we looked at the map. And as they continued and they're climbing over these huge boulders and it just seems totally like an advanced trail, they start to wonder, did we veer off the trail? Worried they might be lost, they turned around and began backtracking, hoping to find the trail and find some landmark that would allow them to confirm they were on the right trail. As they're backtracking, not only do they not find the trail, but they don't find any trail. They've managed to go completely off the path and are now in this kind of random boulder field that they have no idea where it is on the map. Navigating this terrain in the daytime with light would have been difficult even for an experienced hiker. But now it's nighttime, they don't have flashlights, and they're jumping boulder to boulder, and Sailor at some point loses her footing and falls and fractures her leg. Brendan rushes over and tries to help Sailor stand up, but she can't move. And so Brendan tries to put her on his shoulders and starts walking with her. And that works for a little while until they're passing by this waterfall and they fall off of it and they come careening down, they smash onto the ground, they survive the fall, but Brendan now has a broken elbow and Sailor now has a broken ankle on top of her broken leg. Sailor's in excruciating pain, and because of this fall, there's just no way Brendan's going to be able to lift her back up and keep walking. And so the decision was made that Brendan was going to go try to find help on his own, and that she would stay here and continue to yell for help in hopes that someone might hear her before Brendan got back. He takes off, and as soon as he's around the corner and gone, Sailor begins screaming for help, and she would continue screaming for help all through the night, well into the next day. About 24 hours after Brendan had left, he still had not returned. And at this point, Sailor's in and out of consciousness. She knows that she's going downhill quickly unless someone finds her. By the following afternoon, Brendan is still not back yet. So laying face down in the mud with flies buzzing all over her head, She was helpless and trapped, and there was nothing she could do but wait until either a miracle occurred and someone found her, or most likely she just dies. So at the same time that Sailor and Brendan are going through this horrible ordeal, three totally unconnected people decide they want to blow off work and school and just go escape into nature. And so they settle on a hike that would bring them to a waterfall in Santa Barbara, California. Even though this waterfall was a popular tourist attraction, it was very difficult to get to it. It basically required 45 minutes of almost uphill climbing across boulder fields. Very dangerous, and it's not something for a novice hiker to be doing. So they reach the parking lot, they take off on this hike, and when they're just at the base of the waterfall, instead of taking the main trail up to the top, the three hikers decide, let's actually go around off the trail to this pocket of boulders over here where there's a couple freshwater pools that have formed underneath the base of the waterfall. So they leave the main trail and they're climbing over these huge boulders. It's very dangerous. And at some point, one of the hikers starts taking pictures as they're kind of going across these boulders. Through the viewfinder, as they're taking pictures, they notice something out of the corner of their eye that's in frame. It was like this red flash of something. And so the hiker puts their camera down and she looks down where she sees this red, and she can tell right away that it's someone's hair. It's a girl's dyed red hair. And it was Sailor. The hikers went down to Sailor and they called 911, and they came in, they airlifted her out of there, and Sailor would actually make a full recovery. Unfortunately, Sailor's friend Brendan did not make it. They found his body about 100 meters away from where she had been laying. After the ordeal, the woman who was taking those pictures and had spotted Sailor out of the corner of her eye, she went to her camera and was flicking through some of the pictures she had taken during the hike. She had inadvertently taken a picture of Sailor before they had found her. So had it not been for these hikers being where they were and taking those pictures and noticing her red hair, this picture almost certainly would have become the last picture of Sailor Gilliam's alive. Jolie Callan was this little 4'10", 18-year-old girl from Alabama who, despite her tiny stature, had a huge personality and was incredibly popular. Everybody seemed to love this girl. In 2015, Jolie had just graduated high school and was planning to move away from her town and go to college outside of Alabama, and she was really excited about it. But she had a bit of a problem because she had this boyfriend named Lauren Brunner who she had repeatedly tried to end the relationship with because he was so possessive, but she hadn't been able to successfully break up with him yet. Every time she tried to, he would threaten that he was going to hurt himself or that he was going to hurt her if she ever left him, and so she never quite followed through. But with college on the horizon and to her what felt like this fresh start once she left Alabama, she finally pulled the plug on her relationship with Lauren and made it very clear that they are done. And she was firm on that decision even when Lauren did start lashing out and yelling at her and pleading with her and doing everything he could to win back her affection, but it just wasn't going to work because she had moved on. For weeks, Lauren was trying to convince Jolie to change her mind, but again, Jolie just stayed firm on her decision. And after quite some time, it seemed like Lauren had finally got the message because his messages and cries for her to change her mind had stopped, and there was finally a little bit of distance between the two of them. On August 29th, 2015, Lauren would break that silence and would reach out to Jolie and ask her if she wanted to go for a hike with him, simply as friends. Jolie was naturally hesitant about this, worrying that, this hike as friends could very quickly turn into something more that she didn't want, but she did want to remain friends with Lauren. He was very important to her, and so she reluctantly agrees to go on this hike. After Jolie responded to Lauren that she was willing to go, Lauren was really excited. And so he posted on Instagram this picture of himself looking, I guess, excited. It's hard to tell from the image, but the caption basically said that he was excited about going on this hike with her and that things were, quote, looking up. At the same time, after Jolie had given that answer to Lauren, after she had agreed, yes, I'll go hiking with you, she texted her friend jokingly, if something happens to me, you'll know who I was with. The next day, on August 30th, Lauren picks up Jolie and he begins documenting their trip on his Instagram page. Jolie gets in the car and he takes a picture of her and he captions it, on our way to go hiking. The second image that he uploads is of Jolie walking her dog Kiba in a parking lot. It appears that this lot is at the base of the hike they're about to go on. The third image shows Jolie standing on a rock overlooking this forest, and she's holding her dog Kiba. And it's clear, based on this picture, that now they've actually begun the ascent up this trail. The fourth and final picture that was uploaded to his Instagram page shows Jolie standing on a rocky cliff, and she's holding her own camera up and she's taking pictures out over this valley. And the picture was captioned, "Jolie the photographer." Immediately after this picture was taken, Lauren would shoot Jolie twice and push her off of that cliff. He was sentenced to 52 years in jail and bragged to the inmates he was with that if he couldn't have her, no one could. In November of 1961, a wealthy doctor named Arthur Duperrault chartered a luxury yacht called the Bluebell to take he and his family from Fort Lauderdale, Florida to the Bahamas. Along with his family, which was Jean, his wife, his oldest son Brian, who was 14, Terry Jo, who was 11, and Renee, who was 7, Arthur also brought along Julian Harvey, who was a close friend of his that he had hired to be the captain of the ship. And Julian was going to bring along his wife, who was named Mary Dean. And so on November 8th, 1961, the Duperraults and the Harveys set sail on the Bluebell, and by all accounts, their trip was going extremely well. But on the 5th night of the cruise, Terry Jo was down in the sleeping quarters of the Bluebell when she woke up to the sound of stamping sounds and screaming coming from above. She was so scared about what could be going on up there that at first she didn't do anything. But eventually she summoned the courage, got out of her bunk, and she kind of slowly made her way up the stairs and poked her head out onto the deck. And immediately she sees that her family is lying on the ground. They're all deceased. As Terry Jo is frozen in terror, Julian Harvey comes running up to her and tells her to go back down into the sleeping quarters. And so, not knowing any better, she just turns around and runs back down to her bunk. But as she's sitting there, she sees that water is flooding into the Bluebell. She can't stay down here or she's going to drown. So Terry Jo goes back up the steps, she goes onto the main deck, and she sees Julian Harvey, who's standing over the edge of the boat. And she yells to him and says, "Are we sinking?" And he looks at her and he just says, "Yes." And then he promptly jumps over the railing and swims to the lifeboat that had detached from the Bluebell and was drifting away. He climbs onto it and takes off, abandoning her on this sinking ship. Unbeknownst to Terry Jo was the reason the Bluebell was sinking in the first place was because of Julian Harvey. When he was hired to be the captain of the ship, he used this as an opportunity to bring his new wife out with him and then kill her and collect on her insurance policy. Because in her life insurance policy, there was a clause where he would get double the amount of money if she died in the case of a freak accident. But it's speculated that while he was attacking her, one of the Duperraults had seen him doing it, and so in order to cover his tracks, he had turned on the Duperrault family. And so while it's not entirely clear why he didn't just finish the job with Terry Jo, it seems like when he jumped over the railing and took off with the lifeboat, he must have assumed that Terry Jo was going to sink with the rest of the family, and then there would be no more evidence, no more witnesses. So 11-year-old Terry Jo, as she's standing on this sinking ship, she snaps into action. She remembers seeing a cork float that was pinned up against one of the walls of the ship, and she runs over and she undoes it, she puts it on the water, she climbs on top of it just as the Bluebell sinks under the surface of the water and disappears. And so now she's just stranded out in the middle of the ocean. She's got no food, no water, no shelter from the sun on this little dinky cork float. Over the next couple of days, as she drifted along aimlessly in the ocean, her cork float would begin to disintegrate, and she would have to start positioning her body on the float so there wasn't much weight on it because it was basically beginning to sink. And the only position she could find that worked was by dangling her feet in the water. So she's half on this cork float, half of her body is in the water. And so what began happening is parrotfish began swimming up and biting her toes, her feet, and her legs, but she couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't put her legs on the corkboard or it would sink. After 2 days of balancing precariously on this cork float, the parrotfish disappeared and a bunch of dolphins surrounded her. And later she would go on to say that this was the only part of this horrible ordeal where she felt some sort of comfort. These dolphins just swam around her and almost formed a protective barrier around her that kept the parrotfish away and kept other predators away from her. On November 16th, 1961, 84 hours after the Bluebell had sunk, a Greek freighter actually spotted Terry Jo. Amidst all the whitecaps, they were able to see this little girl on a float, and they drove over, and there she was. And initially, when they went down to try to get her, there was so many sharks swimming around her that they had to be very careful that they didn't accidentally knock her into the water, where she might be eaten by sharks. But eventually they were able to get Terry Jo into their basket and pulled her up onto the ship, and she would make a full recovery. As for Julian Harvey, he had made it back to shore and had told authorities that the Bluebell had caught on fire and that everyone had drowned except for him. You know, he had done his best to save them, but he was the only one who could get out. And as luck would have it, he was literally in a police station giving information about what happened when the police were informed that Terry Jo had survived. And the police, they turned to Julian and they say, Terry Jo survived. She's in the hospital. She's going to make a recovery. And Julian was said to have gone totally ashen in the face and then kind of composed himself and said, "Why, that's wonderful." Julian quickly excused himself and fled to a Miami hotel, and the next day he was found dead in his hotel room. This is the picture of Terry Jo that was taken by one of the Greek sailors right when they pulled up alongside her before they pulled her onto their ship. This image would soon appear in publications all over the world. Despite Terry Jo's horrifying ordeal, she would go on to live a very normal life and would have 6 children of her own. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know what you thought of these 3 stories in the comments, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's story and you haven't done this already, please cut all the Waldos out of a Where's Waldo book and give that to the like button for their birthday. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit. It's just called MrBallen and it's linked in the description below. If I intentionally use your story suggestion, I will absolutely credit you. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I will share the photo that is famously associated with them. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please hold the door for the like button, but open it way too early so the like button is forced to do a long hustle walk all the way to the door in order to be polite. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 2009, Rebecca Aylward was a 14-year-old girl living near Bridgend, Wales. She was very close with her mother and her younger siblings. She was a model student, and she was well-liked amongst her peers. That year, she began spending more and more time with a boy in her grade, 14-year-old Josh Davies, who, like her, was a model student and had many friends. In October of that year, Rebecca's mother asked her if Josh was her boyfriend, and she said yes. Even though she knew her daughter was a bit young to be in a serious relationship, she'd spent enough time around Josh to form a very high opinion of him. He was incredibly kind and generous and protective of Rebecca, and so she was happy for the two of them. In January of the following year, Josh was allowed to stay over for the weekend at Rebecca's house, and Rebecca's mother remembers the two of them having such a good time together, goofing around with Rebecca's younger siblings and painting each other's nails. When Josh left at the end of that weekend, he told Rebecca that it had been the best weekend of his life. After he left, Rebecca couldn't stop smiling. She was in love. But later that day, Rebecca received a very surprising text message from Josh. He told her he didn't want to be in a relationship with her anymore. Rebecca was crushed, and she tried to get an answer out of Josh as to why he wanted to break it off, but he didn't give her one, and instead, he began spreading horrible rumors about her at school, and then he went around to all of her friends and told them what a horrible person she was. And so for the rest of that school year, that's how it went. Josh just continued to mercilessly bully Rebecca for no reason. And then behind closed doors, wars, Josh would tell his friends that he not only hated Rebecca, that he wanted to kill Rebecca. But none of his friends took it seriously. In fact, one of his friends even told Josh that if he ever killed Rebecca, he would buy him breakfast. Fast forward to the end of 2010 when the next school year began and Josh's behavior completely changed. Suddenly, he was being nice and caring to Rebecca and showing a genuine interest in her. And Rebecca, even though this guy had abused her for the past better part of a year, she secretly still loved him. And so before long, she allowed him back into her life. About a month later, on the evening of October 22nd, Josh sent Rebecca a Facebook message asking her if she would meet him the following day in the woods near their home. This was a popular hangout spot for teens, and so to Rebecca, this constituted a date. This would be the first official date since their breakup nearly a year ago, and so Rebecca was excited and told him, sure, I'd love to go. And so the next day, Rebecca got up early to put on her makeup and to get ready and get dressed, and then after she was all dolled up, she said bye to her mom and she headed out to meet up with Josh. Shortly after she left, Rebecca's mom got a bad feeling about this meetup, and so she called her daughter and said, hey, stay on the phone with me until you see Josh. And so the two of them chatted until Rebecca made her way to the edge of the woods. And then she says to her mom, oh, I can see Josh. He's walking towards me. Everything is totally fine. I love you and I'll see you later. After she hung up the phone, Joshua walked up to her, said hello, took her hand, and then walked her back into the woods. That morning, Josh had changed his profile picture on Facebook to be an image of the woods where they were having this meeting. And then also that morning, Josh had texted one of his friends and said, you'll be owing me that breakfast soon. And so Josh led Rebecca for quite a while deep into the woods until he came to a stop. And while they were stopped, Rebecca at some point turned to look at something, and with her back to Josh, Josh reached down, grabbed a very heavy rock, and proceeded to beat her to death. Afterwards, Josh called his friends to see what they were up to, and they asked him if he was still with Rebecca. And so Josh is standing over this poor girl's lifeless body, and he says to them, define with. Later that day, Josh brought his best friend into the woods and showed him Rebecca's body. And then less than 24 hours later, that friend would tell police what Josh had done. During Josh's trial, he was completely unfazed, completely emotionless, and was seen smiling for much of it. He said he didn't kill Rebecca, and in fact, he tried to place the blame on his best friend, but the jury saw through it, they found him guilty, and he was ultimately sentenced to 14 years in prison. To this day, no one knows for sure why Josh killed Rebecca. The only concrete motive anybody can point to is that one of Josh's friends offered him breakfast if he went through with the killing. Here is a photo of Josh with Rebecca shortly before he killed her. At the start of World War II in 1939, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia did its best to stay neutral and out of the war. But on March 25th, 1941, they finally caved to Nazi pressure and signed a treaty that aligned them with the Nazis. 2 days later, Yugoslavian military leaders who were unhappy with this treaty overthrew their government and installed a new king in hopes he would be able to keep their country out of the war. But upon learning of this coup, Hitler issued a directive that classified this new Yugoslavian government as hostile and ordered its invasion. 10 days later, on April 6th, the Nazis invaded Yugoslavia, and then 11 days after that, Yugoslavia surrendered. But despite their speedy victory, the Nazis struggled to maintain control of the country because of local resistance groups that fought them at every turn. One of the primary resistance groups was called the Partisans. 3 months after the Nazis' invasion, a 15-year-old girl named Lipa Radic and her family, who all lived in Yugoslavia, were arrested by the Nazis. 3 of the men in Lipa's family were members of the Partisans and so had attracted Nazi attention. 20 days later, as the family still sat in jail wondering what the Nazis were going to do to them, undercover partisans broke into the prison and freed them. After getting back home, Lipa, who was totally inspired by the bravery of these partisan warriors, she immediately joined their group. As a partisan, Lipa would serve as a nurse on the front lines, treating and evacuating the wounded, and then at night, she would participate in direct combat against the Nazis. By 1943, when Lipa was just 17 years old, she had become a very hardened warrior. In February of that year, Lipa was leading a rescue effort of all these women and children, and she was walking them up a mountainside to a partisan camp when the Nazis came out of nowhere and surrounded them on all 4 sides. And Lipa, who refused to surrender, expended all of her ammunition defending these women and children until she was eventually captured. The Nazis moved Lipa to a nearby village where they viciously interrogated her, demanding that she give up the names and locations of her partisan comrades, but Lipa refused. After 3 more days of unsuccessfully trying to get Lipa to give up information, the Nazis grew frustrated and sentenced her to death. And so later that day, Lipa was marched out to a tree situated next to a train station, and hanging down from one of the branches was a noose, and under the noose was a table. With her hands tied behind her back and only wool socks on her feet, the 17-year-old girl calmly climbed up onto the table and stared down at the crowd. As the noose was being tied around her neck, the Nazi commander gave Lipa one more chance to give up information about her partisan comrades, and if she did that, they would spare her life. The Nazis had brought out a cameraman to document this execution because their plan was they would distribute the pictures all over the country to scare the partisans into submission, that this is what happens if we catch partisans. And so with the cameras flashing away, Lipa famously turned to face this Nazi commander and glared at him and said, "Those who you're asking about will reveal themselves when they wipe out all of you evildoers to the last man." After this, Lipa was hanged. The pictures of her execution were indeed distributed all around the country, but there was no context or story. It was just some partisan being executed by the Nazis. But eventually, Lipa's story about her defiance and her famous last words found their way into the partisan camp. And suddenly, those images of her execution took on brand new meaning. They no longer inspired fear like the Nazis were hoping. They inspired courage and pride and a will to keep fighting. When the Nazis discovered this is what that picture now represented, they tried to destroy all of these pictures, but it was too late. Lipa had already become a national hero. Following her death, the partisans continued to fight the Nazis and eventually helped to defeat them. After the war was over, the partisans were recognized as one of the most effective guerrilla forces in the entire war. On December 20th, 1951, Lipa was posthumously awarded the second highest military award in Yugoslavia, called the Order of the National Hero. Here is the photo of Lipa glaring at that Nazi commander after she's just told him her comrades are going to kill him. In 2017, Steven Weber was a larger-than-life 38-year-old DJ living in Louisiana. That year, through a mutual friend, he met Kenesha Antoine, who was a 38-year-old lawyer also living in Louisiana. And as soon as they met, they immediately hit it off and began dating. They both had always wanted to travel the world, but they never got around to it because life always seemed to get in the way. But now that they had each other, and so therefore had travel partners, they decided they couldn't wait any longer, and so they created a bucket list of all the places in the world they wanted to go. And then over the next couple of years, they began checking places off their list. In 2019, when Kenesha was going to turn 40, they decided they needed to go somewhere really special to celebrate. And so they checked their bucket list to see where they hadn't gone yet, and they ultimately settled on going to East Africa because there was a resort there they had always wanted to stay in. It was called the Pemba Resort, and it was famous for their underwater room. They literally have a 2-story cabin floating 300 meters off the coast. Its main floor is at surface level. It's got a beautiful couch that looks out over the water, and you can take the stairs up to the roof of the main floor where there's another couch and you can stargaze and look out 360 degrees, and there's no other cabins out on the water. You're completely isolated. And then if you go back down to the main floor, there is a ladder that goes straight down 10 meters into the master bedroom, and it's completely underwater. All 4 walls have these huge windows that look out directly into the beautiful Indian Ocean. To stay in this cabin for one night costs $1,700, and so Steven and Kenesha decided they would only splurge on it for one night at the end of their Africa trip. So in September of that year, the couple flew out to Africa, and for over a week, they enjoyed sightseeing and going on safaris and eating nice food, and then at the end of their trip, it was time to head out to the underwater room. So they got to the Pemba Resort on the mainland, they checked in, and then they loaded into a boat and were brought out 300 meters to their actual cabin out on the water. And then after the boat left them there, Kenesha got out her phone and began filming. And she filmed as the two walked around and they looked at the amazing view. They went onto the roof and they're looking all around and they're laughing because it's so unbelievably beautiful. And then at some point they make their way down that ladder down into the master bedroom underwater. And the two just can't stop laughing because it was so bizarre and just so incredible being down there. There were fish that were coming up to the glass glass and just staring at them. They just couldn't believe what they were seeing. And then at some point, Stephen makes a joke that a shark was coming, and Kenesha turns around and then sarcastically laughs at him and says, "Oh, okay, haha, yeah, a shark." And then she turns off the recording. A little while later, Stephen leaves Kenesha in the master bedroom, and he goes upstairs and he puts on fins and then hops in the water. Kenesha, who's still down in the master bedroom, is surprised when she sees her boyfriend on the other side of the glass, out in the Indian Ocean. And so Kenesha just grabs her phone and starts filming him because she knows he's up to something. And then at some point, Stephen pulls out a plastic bag with a handwritten note inside of it, and he presses it up against the glass so she can see what it says. And so Kenesha zooms in on the note, and you can tell from the tone in her voice, she really doesn't know what he's doing, but then there's a pause in the video as she's reading the note. And the note says, "I can't hold my breath long enough to tell you everything I love about you, but everything I love about you, I love more and more every day. Will you please be my wife? Marry me." Kenesha is so astounded at this proposal. You can tell she's almost crying. She's so excited. And so as she just continues to film him, Stephen pulls out a ring and he holds it up to the glass. And now at this point, Kenesha is just beside herself. She couldn't be happier. And so Stephen closes the ring box, he grabs the letter, and he swims up out of view back to the surface. And Kenesha turns off the recording, turns around, runs to the ladder, and climbs up to the main floor to give Stephen her answer that yes, she would marry him. But when she got up there, she looked around and Stephen wasn't up there. And so she's yelling for him. She's looking around, waiting for him to show up, but he's not. And so she runs up onto the roof of the main structure to get a better look around to see where he went. But when she got up there, she looked down and there's nothing but ocean. There's no sign of Stephen anywhere. And so starting to panic, she runs back down to the main floor at surface level, and now she's frantically yelling for Stephen, yelling for him to come up to the surface. Where is he? Where are you? But there's no response. Kenesha is all alone out in this cabin in the middle of the ocean. She has no way to contact anyone on the mainland, and so she has no idea what to do. She doesn't know if she should just jump in the water to go looking for him. She doesn't know if he's maybe playing a joke on her. She just doesn't know what's happening. And so she just reflexively begins screaming out for help, hoping that somebody will hear her and come help her find Stephen. And after a little while, some boaters not too far away hear her yelling out for help. They come over and they, along with Kenesha, begin looking, and they ultimately find Stephen. But by the time they found him, it was too late. He had drowned. The details of exactly how he managed to drown or exactly where he was when they found him are not listed online. Here are the final photos of Stephen Weber. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's video and you haven't done this already, please hold the door for the like button, but open it way too early so the like button has to do a long walk run up to the door just to be polite. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. I also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. When I first read this story, I had a physical reaction to the end of it because it comes completely out of left field. You're not ready for it, and it's so horrifying. And no, I'm not just hyping the video. Wait until you hear the ending. It's pretty intense. So fair warning, it's tough to listen to, but it's a great story. I hope you enjoy it. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to your destination wedding and assure them the dress code is 100% casual, but then actually have a black tie wedding. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. Back in 1994, an 11-year-old named Mark was living just outside of Philadelphia with his family. And for the past few summers, he and his siblings would go up to this summer camp on Mount Kitney in a rural part of New Jersey, and they would stay there for about 8 weeks every summer. And this year would be no different, so on June 23rd, Mark and his siblings and his family loaded up the minivan and they began their 2.5-hour commute up to Mount Kitney. When they arrived, the parking lot is filled with parents dropping off their kids, and there's already a batch of campers that had arrived already that are coming down to meet the new campers. And in the middle of all of this chaos, one of Mark's friends from the previous summer, his name was Kyle, he was the same age as Mark, he saw Mark and he runs down and he excitedly tells Mark that they had been placed in the same cabin this year. And so Mark is thrilled. The summer is already off to a great start. So for the next hour or so, Mark and his siblings and Kyle, they began moving all of their stuff up to the cabins. And then at some point, all the parents left and all the campers were instructed to head over to the big dining hall where the camp director and some of the camp counselors were going to go over expectations and scheduling over the next few days. So Mark and Kyle make their way over to the dining hall. They sit down at one of the long tables next to a couple of their buddies, and they listen in while the director goes over the rules and the regulations. And the director would make a special point, like they do every year, to remind all the campers that the faraway dock is absolutely off limits. So don't ask about it, don't try to swim out to it, just leave it alone. The main cluster of buildings that made up the camp was situated right up against this huge man-made lake that was quite long and fairly narrow. And on one side of this lake was the designated swimming area, and then this side they didn't even use for the camp. And within the swimming section, there was a main dock that extended fairly far out into the water that they divided. On one side was the weaker swimmers, and on the other side of the dock was the more advanced swimmers. And then farther out past the dock were these two floating docks, these square floating docks. There was one that was maybe about 10 meters away from the head of the main dock. And then there was the so-called faraway dock that was absurdly far away. In fact, no one really knew why it was out there to begin with. It was at least 100 meters away from the head of the main dock. There were lots of conspiracy theories about why the faraway dock was actually off limits, because the camp staff never actually explicitly said what their reasoning was for not allowing anyone to go near it. They just said it was very dangerous. Most campers believed it was just because the faraway dock was so far away. It was a dangerous swim to be making, even for an experienced swimmer. Other campers had heard a rumor that years earlier, someone had swam out and then gotten sucked underneath. There was apparently some suction underneath this dock, and they got sucked underneath and they drowned. And then the most outlandish conspiracy theory was the dock was not actually a dock at all. It was a lid that was covering over a secret tunnel that went into the lake. But regardless of whichever conspiracy theory the campers believed in, the faraway dock had developed a very spooky reputation, and they did not need to be told twice to not go near it. No one's going near it. Well, unless you're Kyle. After the director and some of the counselors had gone up and spoken, the campers were allowed to finish their meal and then make their way back to their cabins. So Mark and Kyle finish their meal and they start walking back. They go into their cabin. They're getting set up in their bed. Their two other cabin mates come in and they're all kind of chatting and joking around. And at some point they turn off the lights and they want to go to bed. And after a little while, after the lights have been turned off in the cabin and everyone's trying to sleep, Kyle breaks the silence by saying, "Hey guys, I really want to swim out to the faraway dock this summer." Now, Mark and the other two that were in there with Kyle had heard Kyle say this before. He talked incessantly the summer before about wanting to swim out to the faraway dock, but he never did, and he really never showed any serious attempt at wanting to go out there. And so when he's saying this now, they're not taking him seriously at all. And so they kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, it's pretty creepy, that dock out there. I wonder why we can't go out there." And they kind of had a quick discussion about, the various hot theories around why you can't go out there, and ultimately they just kind of wrote it off and went to sleep. The next morning, Mark and Kyle got up and began their walk over to the dining hall to get some breakfast. And on the walk, Kyle says to Mark, "Hey, I want to swim out to the faraway dock today at lunch. Will you come with me?" And so to this point, Mark has only ever heard Kyle talk about the faraway dock and going to it in theory. There's never been a timestamp of this is when we're going to do it. And all of a sudden, Mark's thinking, Kyle might be serious. He might actually want to do this. And so Mark looks at Kyle and he's like, "Are you sure that's a good idea? Because I know there's lots of theories about why we can't go out there, but It's pretty clear the camp counselor and the director believe it's a dangerous place. And Kyle just kind of smirks and he's like, I don't believe that. My dad told me that dock is probably just rotting and that's why they don't want us to be on it. And so I think as long as we're not jumping on it and we stay towards the edge of the dock on the main beams, we should be fine. At this point, Mark wants to convince Kyle not to do it. So he takes another approach. And he goes, well, Kyle, what about the swim out there? I mean, that's a difficult swim and, you're not their best swimmer. So how do you feel about that? And Kyle shrugs and he's like, we'll just take some pool noodles and we'll take our time going out there. And hey, if I start drowning, you can just rescue me. Mark started to get the sense that this was going to happen whether he participated or not. And Mark's thinking to himself, if he goes and he's successful at getting out to the faraway dock and I basically back out because I'm too scared to go, I'm going to have a whole summer of living that down and spending all my time with this guy who's going to rub it in my face. And so Mark didn't know what else to say to Kyle and he just says, all right, if you go, I'll go with you. So Mark and Kyle go in, they have their breakfast, and then afterwards they split up because they each had different activities that morning. And so they don't see each other for a couple of hours. And then it comes to be lunchtime and Mark knows this is the time they were going to swim out to the faraway dock. And he's hoping as he's walking towards the dining hall that somehow Kyle's forgotten or has changed his mind. And as he gets right in front of the dining hall, he hears Kyle yell his name and he looks to the side of the building. There's this big forest right next to the dining hall and he sees Kyle and he's got his bathing suit on and his pool noodle in hand. He's got an extra one as well. And next to Kyle are his two other cabin mates who also have bathing suits on and are also holding pool noodles. Mark's pretty disappointed at this point because now it's really happening. He had put on his bathing suit, so he's ready. And he walks over to Kyle and his other two cabin mates. And the whole time he's kind of hoping that a camp counselor or one of the directors will see him and will question them and stop them from doing what they're about to do. And so he's kind of taking his time, looking over his shoulder, trying to be extra suspicious as he walks across this field. Like, look at me, I'm doing something bad. I hope no one catches me. And he makes it to the tree line and no one catches him. And Kyle hands him his pool noodle. And then Kyle and the other two cabin mates turn and start kind of walking/running into the woods and Mark follows after them. And as they're running, Kyle turns around and tells Mark that their cabin mates didn't want to be left out and that's why they're here. And Mark had a sinking feeling that probably they had the same reaction that he did, which is, if I don't do this with him, he's going to rub this in my face for the whole summer and I'm living with him. And I'd rather just swim to this horrible dock than put up with that for the whole summer. And so they finally make it to the swimming area and they have their main dock that juts out into the water. And then there's the closer floating dock. And then way over there is the faraway dock. And as soon as they get onto the beach, they're kind of exposed. And the main camp, if they were down at the water's edge, they could look and see them if they were looking in that direction. And so the boys immediately get into the water and they put themselves up against the main dock, kind of obscuring them from view from anybody that's over at the main side of camp. And they begin swimming out to the faraway dock. The swim out was super easy. It's beautiful outside, it's sunny, the water feels great. They had their pool noodles to rest on, so not much energy to actually do the swim itself. And they were taking their time because they had at least about an hour and a half to 2 hours before they'd need to be back at camp before someone recognized they were gone. And so they get about 3/4 of the way out to the faraway dock, and it's the first time they can see it more or less up close. Because before this, none of them had been to the faraway dock and had never been close to the faraway dock. So this is the first time they're really getting a good look at it. And the dock is pretty unremarkable. It looks a little bit more beat up than the other dock. The wood is more gray and it looks like there's probably a good amount of splinters on there, but it definitely does not look like it's so rotten that if they climb on it, it's going to collapse under their weight, which makes them happy because now they know they can actually get on it and take a break from swimming for a second. But they were kind of let down. They're nearing this thing that's become almost like folklore within their camp, and it's just kind of a huge letdown that it looks like any other dock. They finally made their way right up to the ladder, which was fairly rusted over, and Mark was actually the first one to be in front of the ladder, and he was about to grab it and step onto it when he stops. And the other three are right behind him, and they're like, "What?" And he goes, "Look at that." And on the ladder is this thick-bodied, wide, fat spider with long legs that's just perched on the rung of the ladder. And so the boys all see the spider and they're like, okay, number one, I'm not touching that ladder. I'm going to be climbing up somewhere else. I'll figure out a way to get on this dock that does not involve this ladder. And two, how did the spider get out here? It's huge. What is it doing out here? Like, where did it come from? There's no land around us. But they're like, you know what? Whatever. There's one random spider on this dock. Can't be a big deal. And so they make their way over to the side, so away from the ladder. And Mark actually grabs onto the edge of the dock, the wood, and manages to pull himself up, and they push him up as he gets up there. And Mark turns around and he hoists up Kyle, and they end up hoisting up the next two. And before long, you have all four on the dock, and they're looking at each other and they're feeling pretty good about it. Even though it was a letdown that there's not much going on out here besides maybe that weird spider, but it'll make for a great story. And they couldn't wait to get back and tell their friends that they had made it out to the faraway dock. So they weren't ready to just jump right back in the water and go right back to shore. So they laid down on the wooden slats of the dock itself, and they just enjoyed laying in the sun. And as Mark's laying there, he hears a very distinctive scratching sound or rustling sound that's coming from right underneath the floorboards that he's laying on. And the dock itself was resting on these big blue barrels to stay afloat. And so Mark's laying there thinking maybe the barrel is rotating underneath the wood and it's causing a weird sound, or maybe there's some residual waves from us moving around and displacing the water that's, lapping up against the side of the barrels. But Mark at the time was not really overanalyzing this. This is just his initial thoughts of what the sound could be. He's not remotely concerned about what the sound is. He just took stock of it. And at some point, Mark and the other guys stand up because they're kind of bored of just laying there, and they start goofing around and pushing each other and trying to see if they can push each other off of the dock. And then they start playing one of their favorite games that they play on the other floating dock, where they all kind of shimmy to one corner of the dock and try to get that side to begin to submerge without falling off. So the boys shuffle to the corner of the dock, and they're all kind of jokingly jockeying for position, because they're going to flood this side and they don't want to fall off. And so they get in position and the dock starts to sink. And so after about a third of the dock was now underwater, they start hearing a scratching sound like the one Mark had heard when he was laying on his back. And all of a sudden, hundreds of those huge, thick-bodied, long-legged spiders start coming out from underneath the dock through the breaks in the wood. They're pouring out frantically, trying to climb out from underneath the dock because the boys have just flooded their nest. And so hundreds of these things are pouring out from underneath and sliding down towards the boys because it's on an angle. And Kyle, in a panic, loses his footing and falls face first onto the dock. But because his weight shifted so quickly, the dock went down flat again, and now Kyle's laying on the dock as these spiders are swarming his body, getting in his hair, and Mark and the other two are still on the dock, and they can feel the spiders at their feet, and they jump into the water. And Mark, as soon as he hits the water, he sees there's hundreds of spiders in the water. They're all over the place, and that's when he feels one in his hair, and he's trying to swat it off of his head, and he dives underwater thinking that's going to get rid of it, but no, he feels it grip down tight on his hair, and he had to reach up and actually grab the body of the spider and pull it off of his hair. He swims up, there's more spiders around him, and he frantically starts swimming away, and he hears Kyle screaming, and he sees him jump into the water, still trying to pull spiders off of his body. And then the boys would swim as fast as humanly possible to shore, the whole time either literally pulling spiders out of their hair that were clinging to their hair or their ears, or believing, because they just had this horrible experience, that there are more spiders on them. It's the whole time, they're pulling spiders off, even if they aren't there. Like Ricky Bobby in Talladega Nights, he thinks he's on fire when he's not. That's the situation they're in, but with spiders. They finally get to shore, and they're looking each other over to make sure there's no more spiders on them, in their shorts, on their back, in their hair, in their ears. And finally, all the spiders are gone and they're safe again. Mark said he'll never get over the trauma of this horrifying event. And he says what really gets to him is when he thinks about when he was laying on his back on the dock and the other three were doing the same thing, and he heard that rustling, that scratching sound. That was the sound of hundreds of these massive spiders that were literally inches away from them, perched underneath the dock. And not just any spider, but the dock spider. And they're named that because they make their home in docks, because they typically hunt for fish, small fish, insects as well, and they have the ability to run on water. They have this waxy substance on their legs that keeps them from sinking, and they can even jump on water and then land again on water to avoid being eaten by fish. And they can go underwater for up to 30 minutes. They can effectively scuba dive because they trap air on their hairy arms and underneath their bellies, and they breathe that while they're underwater. And so these spiders identified the faraway dock as a great spot to live, and they must have ran out on the water to this dock and then made a home underneath, and then no one's disturbing them, so they flourished. Later on, Mark would find out from one of the camp counselors that the real reason the faraway dock was off limits, the reason that they didn't want anyone going out there, is because they discovered the faraway dock was a breeding ground for these dock spiders. And they tried to get rid of them, but they kept coming back. And so after a number of failed attempts, they finally just gave the faraway dock to the dock spiders. And the reason they don't tell the campers about it is because they don't want to scare them. And so that's that. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you found the secret in today's episode, please tell us what it is in the comments section and give us the timestamp where it's located in the episode. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to your destination wedding and tell them it is totally 100% casual dress code, but then actually have a black tie wedding. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our 3, 4, even 5 weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's just JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today's story is definitely a great example of that. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please call the like button to tell them you want to congratulate the newest winner of the Best Button Award, but then before they say anything, just ask them if they have the phone number for the subscribe button. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the night of January 3rd, 2008, a 21-year-old man named Part Engel had just poured himself a beer and sat down on the couch next to his girlfriend to watch some TV when he heard a knock at the front door of his apartment in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. It was late, around 8 p.m., and Part was not expecting any company, and so before he got up, he looked over at his girlfriend to be like, "Are you expecting anybody?" And she looked at him and kind of shrugged, and so Part just put his beer down and stood up and walked over to the front door to see who was there. And when Part opened up the front door, he was very surprised to see his mother standing there carrying a small duffel bag. So Part's mother lived in Middletown Township, which was located about an hour and a half away from Part's apartment. And while it was not unusual for Part's mom to stay over at Part's apartment, what was unusual is her just showing up unannounced. She never did that. And on top of that, as Part is looking at his mom, he could see clearly she had been crying because her eyeliner was smudged and her face was all puffy. And so Part knew clearly, there must be a problem here. But when he asked his mother, like, "What's going on, Mom?" she wouldn't tell him. She would just say, "I have to stay with you for the night." And then before he or Part's girlfriend could do or say anything, his mom just walked inside, walked down the hallway, went into the guest bedroom, and then shut and locked the door. And so Part and his girlfriend were left looking at each other like, what's going on here? 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., Part was in bed next to his sleeping girlfriend, just staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Part was so anxious about whatever was going on with his mom because where he was staying, his bedroom, was right next door to the guest bedroom where his mom was staying, and so he already knows there's clearly some issue here with his mom, but all night he's been listening to her next door just pacing and crying in this guest bedroom, and he has no idea what's going on. But deep down, Part knew that whatever was going on, it very likely had to do with his father, whose name was Arun Kumar. Part's parents had a complicated relationship. They had immigrated from India decades earlier and had settled in Pennsylvania, where they had 2 kids, Part and Part's sister. Part's father, Arun Kumar, worked as an engineer at Boeing, and Part's mother owned a 7-Eleven franchise. And basically, since arriving in America, the two of them had really come with nothing and had worked their way up to now to where they had a very comfortable life, kind of like the American dream, the house, the white picket fence, the kids, the whole thing. And so Part had always believed that, his parents, as a result of getting through so much hardship together, that they must truly love each other now. I mean, to have gone through all that together, that would certainly make 2 people very close. And for the most part, that actually seemed to have been the case, that his parents just got along great and were a great couple. That is until a couple of years earlier. Arun Kumar had started an affair, and Part's mother had caught him. Now, Arun Kumar said that, this affair meant nothing and he would stop right now, and Part's mother had forgiven him, in order to keep the family together. But despite Part's mom forgiving Arun Kumar, deep down, she just knew she could never actually trust him again. And so she actually wound up enlisting Part's help to basically watch Arun Kumar's behavior. She had Part set up the software that basically spied on Arun Kumar's computer. Through this software, Part's mom could basically watch Arun Kumar's email traffic and all of his internet activity. Now, Part had not felt good about setting up the spy software on his dad's computer. It just felt totally wrong to be getting in between his parents like this. But he just felt like this was the only way Part's mom was ever going to be able to actually move on. And so Part sort of felt like this was his responsibility. This is the way that the family was going to stay together. His mom really just needed that extra layer of transparency on her husband. Otherwise, the family was going to fall apart. But now, as Part lay in his bed, unable to sleep, listening to his mom pace back and forth in the room next door, he began to think to himself, maybe my mom found something using the software on my dad's computer. Maybe Arun Kumar had started another affair, and that was why his mom was now so upset. But just then, Part heard a new noise coming out of his mother's room. At first, it kind of sounded like low murmuring, like his mom was saying something to herself, but then he realized his mom was having a real conversation with somebody on the phone. And since Part couldn't sleep, and he was pretty intrigued about what the heck was going on with his mom to begin with, he decided to basically spy on his mom. So he very quietly got out of his bed and he walked around to the wall that lined up against his mother's room, and he put his ear to the wall and he began to listen. And what he heard was far worse than anything he could have imagined. What he heard his mom saying to whoever she was talking on the phone was that she had discovered that Arun Kumar had taken out $3.6 million in life insurance policies on Part, on his sister, and on his mother. And now Part's mom was saying to whoever she was talking to on the phone that she wasn't even worried about divorce at this point. She was worried about the physical safety of her and her kids. She was worried that her husband was going to kill her and her kids to get this payout. And so not long after saying this, Part's mom hung up the phone and went back to pacing and crying in the room. And Part, meanwhile, has just heard this horrifying news, and he had no idea what to make of it. I mean, he knew his dad was not a good husband, but the idea that his dad would want to hurt his wife, or him, or his sister, just seemed totally impossible. But then, as Part's standing there just kind of processing what he's heard, he began to think back to these recent behavioral changes he noticed in his father that at the time he had kind of chalked up to, maybe my dad's stressed or something. But now, given the context of what his mom was talking about, Part began to wonder if these behavioral changes were a sign of something being terribly wrong with his father. The first change that Part had noticed happened a few weeks earlier. Now, Part's dad was normally a very mild-mannered and calm guy, but a few weeks earlier, he had gotten into this vicious dispute with their next-door neighbor over the property line that ran between their two properties. It was like he was picking a fight with the neighbor or something. And then, a few days after that, one of the bathroom sinks in their house had stopped working, and so Arun Kumar got out his tools and went to go break apart the sink and put it back together again, and because he was an engineer, this was something he did, this was typical behavior. But after breaking apart the sink, basically ripping it all apart and having all the parts on the ground, Part's dad didn't put it back together. He just left all the tools and all the parts just scattered across the bathroom floor. And considering that Arun Kumar was typically incredibly meticulous and organized, and he's this brilliant engineer, to Part, seeing his dad leave this sloppy mess and this unfinished sink, it felt totally off. And so standing there in his bedroom, totally horrified about everything he's heard, and, now kind of second-guessing everything he knew about his dad, who suddenly seemed like this combative, kind of disorganized guy, Part suddenly felt like, I have to learn more here. I have to figure out if my dad really is a threat. So Part quietly left his bedroom and made his way to the kitchen where his laptop was, and he loaded up that software that spied on his dad's computer. And as he began logging into this program, Part was thinking, maybe I'm going to find something that will show that my mom is clearly just overreacting and misinterpreting what she's seeing, that, my dad is not, out to kill us for some insurance payout. But after loading up this program and kind of scanning through some recent activity, Part realized that actually the situation with his dad was way worse than his mom had made out on that call he overheard. He not only found all these multi-million-dollar insurance policies taken out on him, his sister, and his mom, but also he discovered this stash of fraudulent-looking paperwork. There were all these passport photos of his father, but then connected to these photos was a passport application that was using somebody else's name, as if his father was trying to forge paperwork to create a phony passport for himself. And so at this point, Part felt like his mother was certainly not overreacting here, that in fact it really did seem like his father was, preparing to kill his family and collect millions of dollars in insurance money, and then using this, fake passport he was making, he'd be able to flee the country. For the next several days, Part's mom stayed at Part's apartment, but she barely ever left the guest bedroom. And then when she would leave the bedroom, Part would go up to her and try to ask her, hey, what's going on, without giving away how much he knew already. But Part's mom was like, nope, I don't want to talk about it, and she would just go right back in the room, shut and lock the door. And so finally, after several days of this, Part just went to his mom's bedroom door, he knocked on the door until she answered, and then before she could kind of shoo him away, he said, Mom, stop, I know what's going on, I read the emails, and we have to figure out what we're going to do, because our lives literally depend on it. I agree with you, it looks like Dad is going to kill us and then flee the country. And so Part and his mom would talk through all the details of what was found on his computer, and ultimately they would decide that Part would be the one to go to police and tell them what was going on with Arun Kumar. And so the next day, Part went to the police station, with a stack of evidence that he believed would implicate his father, and Part was so nervous about this, he was shaking. But when he talked to an actual police officer, they looked over his evidence and they heard the whole story, but they told him, look, we really can't do anything about this. They told Part that, it's not illegal to take out life insurance policies on your family. And then also the police officer pointed out that in addition to Arun Kumar taking out those policies on his kids and his wife, he had also taken out a policy on himself and made his wife and his kids the beneficiaries of that policy. And so the police officer said, look, this does not look like a murder plot to me. It just looks like your dad is doing something fairly responsible. And then as for the passport application paperwork, where his dad had used a phony name, the police officer said, look, he has not filed this paperwork, and so it's not illegal what he's doing. Anybody can get some paperwork out and fill it in with whatever they want. It becomes illegal if they attempt to actually pass it off and submit the paperwork, and as far as we know, he hasn't done that. So that's weird, but it's not illegal. And so Part had to leave the police station, and he went back to the apartment, and he told his mom what happened, and ultimately they decided that all they could do now was just wait and continue to watch that software that monitored Arun Kumar's computer, and just hope Arun Kumar would do something that was incriminating that they could then bring to the police and say, see, he's trying to kill us and collect a payout and flee the country.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video.
Back in 2017, I had just gotten out of the military after 7 years of service, and honestly, it was a huge struggle trying to reintegrate back into civilian life. Not only was I totally out of the loop with modern technology, but I also had no idea how to get a job or even how to identify what a good job was. I just felt lost. And so that, combined with dark thoughts swirling around my head from previous deployments, made it so I really couldn't even function. And so before long, I was jobless, depressed, and angry. But I didn't tell anyone. Even though I had been raised in a household where talking about your feelings was a very normal thing. But now that I really needed to do that, I just couldn't. But luckily, my family and friends noticed the big change in my behavior, and ultimately they convinced me to go seek out professional help. And I'm so glad I did, because it was such a relief. Speaking to a neutral, trained third party about your darkest thoughts is so cathartic and really promotes healing. And while of course therapy is not some one-size-fits-all solution, it is a great starting point for anybody who's struggling right now. And a great option for therapy is BetterHelp, which is entirely online. All you have to do is fill out a quick survey online, and then very quickly you'll be paired with a licensed BetterHelp therapist who is trained to listen and give you unbiased advice. Let BetterHelp connect you with a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/MrBallen or select MrBallen during sign-up to enjoy a special discount on your first month. Okay, back to the story. Over the next few days, that Part and his mother every day just constantly checked this software and watched what Arun Kumar was doing on his computer, all they saw was Arun Kumar was using his computer to do work emails and really basic stuff, absolutely nothing incriminating. And in fact, over these few days, Arun Kumar would actually call Part's mom to ask her when she was coming back home again, and she would tell him that basically she was going to stay at Part's place indefinitely, And Arun Kumar did not seem upset or annoyed by this at all. If anything, it just seemed like he was really distracted and wasn't actually listening to Part's mom as she was speaking. And while this did seem kind of suspicious to Part and his mom, that basically Arun Kumar didn't care that his wife wasn't coming home anytime soon, it still wasn't incriminating. And so Part and his mom decided to just continue looking deeper and deeper into Arun Kumar's computer to see if there was anything that could begin to explain what was really going on here. And sure enough, Part dug deeper and deeper into Arun Kumar's computer, and he did discover something. Part began finding all these emails with people back in India that kind of vaguely indicated that Arun Kumar was involved in a very sketchy deal, like a business deal. Now, again, the emails were incredibly vague, but what was clear in these back and forths in these emails was that it seemed like Arun Kumar had gotten wrapped up with some really shady people, and they were having these really nasty exchanges in these emails about this, deal that Arun Kumar seemed to be involved in. And so Part began to wonder if maybe he and his mom had this all backwards, that he, his mom, and his sister were not the ones actually in danger here, that in fact it was Arun Kumar who was in danger. Maybe because this deal, went south, and these people that he was doing this deal with, maybe they were mad at him, and so perhaps all these life insurance policies and this new fake identity were some sort of move by Arun Kumar to kind of flee the danger he was in. And so obviously, if this was true, this was still a horrible situation for their whole family, but it was markedly better than what Part and his mom had been operating on before, which was, that Arun Kumar was going to kill his whole family. And so pretty quickly, as a result of kind of thinking about this in a new way, Part's mother started feeling a lot better about the whole situation and actually left Part's apartment and went back to the house to go live with Arun Kumar. And Part himself began to think that, maybe this is not as big of a deal as we thought it was. I'm sure my dad will figure out whatever he needs to figure out here to get out of whatever mess he's in. And over the coming days, Part checked in with his mom every single day because now she's living with Arun Kumar and she said everything was fine. And Part, he continued to check his dad's computer activity and nothing else really popped up. It was still just the same stuff they had originally found. And so it just kind of seemed like, maybe this really is not as big of a deal as we thought it was. But on the morning of January 20th, 2008, so about 2.5 weeks after Part's mom showed up at his apartment, everything changed. On that morning, Part logged into his computer to check on his dad's computer using that software because he was still checking it every single day. And the first thing he saw was his dad had sent this email to this woman who Part didn't know, and this woman was certainly not his mother. And in this email, his dad told this person that he had a big contract coming up and he was going to make a ton of money from it. And then also at the end of this email, he told this woman that he loved her. And so right away, Part's thinking, okay, my dad is obviously having another affair because this is not my mom and he's saying he loves her. And also, what's my dad talking about with this big contract coming up? Is he talking about the insurance policies? Does he expect those to pay out soon, indicating that I, my sister, or my mom might be dead? And then also, the other thing that Part noticed that morning as he's checking through his dad's computer activity is he found another message his dad had sent out recently where he communicated to somebody that his father had died. So Part's grandfather had died. And also in this message, Arun Kumar is telling this person that he's going to go to his dad's funeral alone, that his wife and 2 kids were not invited to this funeral. And so Part's reading this, and he's totally devastated by the fact that his grandfather's dead, and the fact that, he's not being invited to the funeral? But again, he's thinking, oh my gosh, is that because my dad thinks I'm not going to be alive? Is this all connected, between the big contract and the fact that we're not going to be at the funeral? Is this my dad thinking he's going to enact this murder plot soon? Part didn't know, but he felt like he and his mom and his sister were running out of time and he needed to act right now. And so Part got off his computer, he called his mom, and they made a plan. That evening, at around 9:15 p.m., Part got in his car and began driving towards his parents' house to go confront his dad. This was the plan he and his mom had come up with. Basically, his mom would stay at Part's apartment, and Part would go and tell his dad, we know about what you're doing, and you gotta stop. And even though Part was totally jacked up on adrenaline as he drove towards the house, he felt like he really had the upper hand going into whatever this confrontation was going to be. Because, number one, Part was showing up totally unannounced at night to his dad's place. I mean, his dad's going to be caught off guard when he sees him. And also, Part knew he was much physically bigger than his father. Part was over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds, and so he had the physical angle as well. And so Part really felt confident driving towards the house that he was going to come out the victor in whatever ensued. At around 10:45 p.m., Part finally arrived in front of his parents' house. He parked the car, he got out, he walked up the front steps, and he knocked on the front door. And a couple of seconds later, Arun Kumar came to the door, he opened it up, and he's totally confused to see his son standing there. And then before Arun Kumar could do anything, Part, in his deepest and most authoritative voice, looked at his dad and said, "We need to talk." And then he intentionally bumped into his dad with his shoulder as he walked into the house. And so his dad is like standing at the front door, not really sure what's going on. And Part, after taking a few steps in, he abruptly turns around. And so now he's looking back at his dad. And he takes a step forward and gets right in his dad's face and says, I know what you're up to. I know what you've done. And you have a simple choice to make. You can either stop what you're doing and become the family man you're supposed to be, faithful to mom, or I'm going to go to the police and tell them what you're up to, and you're going to go to jail. Either way, whatever you're doing stops right now. And for a moment, Part and Arun Kumar are basically staring at each other in silence, and then Arun Kumar, before Part could stop him, basically ran past Part, passed him down the hallway, and he ran into the master bedroom, disappearing from Part's view. And so Part's turned around, and he wasn't expecting this, and suddenly all that confidence he had going into this confrontation was gone. Because he's thinking, oh my goodness, my dad, maybe he's got a weapon in there. I need to get in there and stop him. And so Part, he turns and runs down the hallway, he darts into the bedroom, having no idea what he's going to see inside, but what he sees does catch him off guard. Arun Kumar is just sitting on the bed, doing nothing. He's just staring what looks like at the wall, and Part just stops in the doorway, looks at his dad, and then realizes his dad's not just absently staring at the wall, he's staring into the open bathroom. And in the open bathroom, on the ground, are all those tools left over from where his dad had been working on the sink and then never finished. Like, all these tools are scattered on the ground, including one tool that now Part is realizing his dad is looking directly at. It was a big, heavy metal pipe wrench. And suddenly Part realized, my dad is looking at a weapon, and he's considering whether or not to get that weapon and attack me with it. The next morning, Part's mother pulled up in front of the house that she shared with Arun Kumar. And she walked up the steps, went to the front door, she opened it up, and as soon as she stepped inside, she yelled out, hello, who's here? But there was silence. And immediately she got a bad feeling, but she knew she had to investigate. And so Part's mom began slowly walking down the hallway, the same hallway that Part and his dad had been fighting in the night before. And she went down the hallway and she turned and looked into the master bedroom, and she couldn't believe what she saw. There was blood on the carpets, on the walls. It was a bloodbath, and in the middle of the room was an obvious dead body that was so mutilated and destroyed, she couldn't even identify it. And so seconds later, she had run outside and dialed 911. It would take police almost 4 years to finally untangle Arun Kumar's insane web of lies and also make an arrest for the murder that took place inside of that house. And the reason it took nearly 4 years is because nothing in this case was what it looked like. Now, Part and his mother had been correct about a number of things about Arun Kumar. For example, Arun Kumar was having another affair, he had taken out life insurance policies on his whole family, and he was looking to obtain a fake identity. They were also right that Arun Kumar had become embroiled in a very shady deal back in India, but the specifics of that deal were not what Part and Part's mom thought it was. And when Arun Kumar announced in that message that, his father had died and he'd be traveling to India all alone, that his wife and his kids weren't coming, they weren't invited, well, Part and his mom had been correct, that this was a cover. This was an excuse for Arun Kumar to put his big plan into action. And Arun Kumar's big plan did involve murder, and so Part and his mom were right about that aspect of his plan. However, Arun Kumar's target for this murder was not who Part and his mom thought it was. They were not the target. Arun Kumar was going to murder himself. Or more specifically, he was going to pretend to kill himself. That was actually the shady deal he was involved in back in India. He was working with people who could help him fake his own death. And so what he was going to do is go to India, fake his death, and then once he was dead on paper, that would trigger an insurance payout of his own life insurance policy, and that money would go to his wife and his kids, and then Arun Kumar would disappear using his fake identity he would have, along with his mistress, the woman he was having an affair with. That was the person he had sent that email to talking about the big payout. But Part and Part's mom did not know this last critical piece of Arun Kumar's plan. They really believed they were the target of this big plot, that they were going to get killed, and so that's why they felt like they had to act first. So on January 20th, 2008, Part and his mother worked out an alibi for themselves. What they were going to tell people is that at around 8 p.m., Part went and picked up his mother from the house that she shared with Arun Kumar, and the two of them just went back to Part's apartment, and that was it. But in reality, Part never went over and picked his mom up and brought her back to the apartment. Instead, she was at the house with Arun Kumar when Part showed up at 10:45 p.m. to confront Arun Kumar. So it was him and his mom at the house as Part is demanding Arun Kumar come clean and stop what he's doing. And then at some point during this heated argument in the hallway, Arun Kumar turned and ran into the bedroom, and Part chased after him. And Part, he sees Arun Kumar sitting on the edge of the bed, and he thinks his dad is looking at the pipe wrench on the floor in the bathroom. And Part thinks, my dad is about to get that wrench and attack me with it. And so Part just acted first, and he ran and grabbed that wrench, and he beat his father to death with it. And then after leaving his father's unrecognizable, mutilated body just lumped in the middle of the bedroom floor, blood all over the walls, he and his mother just left the house and went back to Part's apartment. And then the next day, Part's mom went back to the house, and she pretended to find Arun Kumar's body, even though she already knew he was in there. And then she called 911 and acted totally beside herself when they showed up, as if she had just happened upon her husband's dead body. But almost 4 years later, when the truth finally came out about this horrible situation, Part and his mother were arrested. Now, both of them absolutely maintained that they genuinely believed their lives were in danger because of Arun Kumar, and they said during that confrontation in the house, Part was only acting in self-defense. He really believed his dad was going to grab that pipe wrench first, and so he had to do it before him, and that's why he killed his dad. But ultimately, Part would plead guilty to manslaughter, and he would be sentenced to 33 months in prison, and Part's mother would plead guilty to conspiracy, and she would be sentenced to 10 months in prison.
I want the people in the audience to be drawn into the stories I'm telling the same way they are at home. And it's a privilege to have the opportunity to stand in front of people that want to be there.
So that's going to do it. If you want more strange, dark, and mysterious content, remember we have a whole slew of strange, dark, and mysterious podcasts that are free under the Ballen Studios umbrella. All you have to do is go to any podcast platform and look up Ballen Studios, and you'll find the Mr. Ballen podcast, Mr. Ballen's Medical Mysteries, you'll find Runful, Bedtime Stories, and our newest podcast, Wartime Stories. These are all incredible shows. They're all strange, dark, and mysterious, and again, they are free, so go binge. As always, thank you so much for your support. Until next time, see ya.
There is nothing quite as satisfying as a true story that's mysterious and interesting, it sucked you in, that has a killer plot twist, a killer reveal. That, to me, is just the most satisfying thing you can find. I am a complete story addict, and so I go looking for these stories. I go literally searching for real-life stories with real-life plot twists. And in my opinion, the very best one is the story of the missing lighthouse keepers, and that is the story I'm going to tell today. So the too long didn't read version of this story is a crew is sent out to this lighthouse off the coast of Scotland. They're being sent out there to relieve the workers that are there, provide new supplies, and just kind of make sure everything is okay. When they get out there, nothing is okay. The 3 lighthouse keepers are missing. The island and the lighthouse are kind of in disarray. And then they find the lighthouse keeper's logbook, which, needless to say, is very strange. It has some entries in it that don't really add up. And then when you combine those entries with what some people had to say on the mainland that were watching the island, it really doesn't add up. So it creates this really epic plot twist. It's absolutely worth watching to the end, I promise. So let's get there. Off the coast of northwestern Scotland lies a stretch of 7 small islands. It's called the Flannan Isles. One of those isles is called Eilean Moor, and on Eilean Moor is a lighthouse, and that's where our story is going to be centered. But before we get into the story, Eilean Moor has some odd history to it. It's long been regarded as a place that's paranormal. In fact, on the island, basically the only people that inhabit it are the lighthouse keepers. Usually there's 3 or 4 of them, and sheep. And so sheep herders often go out to that island, and they're the ones that report hearing strange sounds and just feeling like they're being watched. It's a creepy place. And in fact, anybody that visits the island that isn't a sheep herder or a lighthouse keeper, even if they've never heard of the history of Eilean Moor, oftentimes report a very odd sense of being watched, of just not feeling right on that island. And so Eilean Moor really had developed a reputation as being a pretty creepy place. So in addition to just the strange aura around the island that basically anyone who went there reported, anybody that went to the Church of St. Flannan is its name, they reported feeling like they were being drawn to pray, that there was this overwhelming sense that you should be praying as soon as you walk into the church. And in fact, the draw was so strong, like getting on your knees and praying, that they developed this strange ritual that when you got to the island, it was customary that before you went in, you immediately dropped to your knees and crawled around the church on your knees before making your way inside and continuing to pray. So just a strange place with strange rituals. That's the scene that is set for this true life, very strange mystery. In December of 1900, a steamboat was passing by the Flannan Isles, and as they rounded their way past Eilean Moor, they noticed that the light was out. The lighthouse was not operational. And so when that steamboat finally got to port 3 days later, they told authorities that, hey, Eilean Moor is not operational. You should go check on them. And so as it happened, it was actually time to replace the lighthouse keepers that were at Eilean Moor. So Captain James Harvey gets his crew together, and he takes Joseph Moore, who's the replacement lighthouse keeper, and they head out to Eilean Moor to check on the lighthouse, check on the lighthouse keepers, but also replace them. So it was a changing of the guard and making sure that everything was okay. As you approach Eilean Moor, you would see a massive staircase coming up from the dock all the way up to where the lighthouse is. So from a distance, if you were looking at Eilean Moor, it would be fairly easy to break out anybody that was walking down the steps to get down to the dock. And since the island was really only inhabited by lighthouse keepers and sheep, the crew, Captain Harvey and his crew, as they're making their approach to Eilean Moor, they're watching those steps to see if the lighthouse keepers are going to notice them and come down and greet them on the dock, because that was customary. You always are at the dock ready to assist the crew as they come into Eilean Moor. That was just the way it was done. And so as they're making their approach, they're watching these steps, looking for signs that the keepers are coming down, because on some level, the crew that's going out to replace them, on the back of their head, they're a little bit nervous that something's wrong. I mean, they know that the lighthouse was not operational, and that's part of the reason they're going out. So they're kind of like actively watching those steps. They're looking for signs that they're coming down to the dock. And as they get closer and closer, they don't see anybody come down the steps. They don't see anyone on the dock. And even worse, no preparations were made for the next crew to come into the dock. That was something that all lighthouse keepers did. They kept that dock, up to codes that if any time someone came in, they could properly dock and make their way up. So no preparations are made. No one is coming down to greet them. So the omen is pretty bad. And so Captain Harvey and his crew, they dock on the dock, and the captain and his crew say, hey, to Joseph Moore, you go up and just do a cursory examination of the island. Make sure these guys are okay. We'll stay down here for a minute. You go check. So Joseph Moore gets out, and he starts walking up this massive set of stairs where he can't see the lighthouse. He can only see the steps. It's pretty steep. And later he would say that he had this deep sense of just foreboding, like something bad is about to happen. He felt very stressed out as he's walking up these stairs. And as he makes his way up, he finally kind of crests to where he can actually start to break out the top of the island where you can see the lighthouse and you can see, where they were staying. And the first thing he notices is the steel railings that line this massive staircase up to the island near the lighthouse itself. The steel railings had been bent over. Like, imagine if it was made out of tinfoil. They had been folded onto themselves. Like, pretty significant damage to, you know, steel railings. And so he makes note of that, and he also notices that this big boulder that just, I don't think it was decorative, it just was on the island, and so they built around it. There's this huge boulder that just was right in front of the lighthouse, and it had been that way for, you know, years and years. It had moved significantly, and you could actually see a trail underneath the boulder where it had rolled across the grass. So Joseph Moore, the replacement lighthouse keeper, is thinking to himself, my God, this is, you know, this is straight out of the storm of the century. Like, clearly the worst storm ever has hit this island. No wonder their lighthouse was non-operational, because they were hit with like the worst storm ever. And so that's his initial assessment. He goes up to the door. The door is unlocked, but shut, and he opens it up. First thing he does is he yells for the lighthouse keepers that are supposed to be there. They don't call back. There's apparently no one in the lighthouse. Before he even starts moving through the lighthouse, he looks on his right and he sees all the hooks where they would have kept their clothes. And one hook still is holding an oilskin jacket. And anytime you would leave the lighthouse, especially if you were leaving the island for some reason, there is no reason in the world you would not be wearing that jacket. So it's another kind of bad sign. It means that if they're not here, if the 3 lighthouse keepers are not inside of this lighthouse, why aren't all 3 oilskins gone with them? It's another sign that something terrible has happened. He looks into the kitchen, and on the kitchen table is plates of meat. There is, you know, pickles that have just been pulled out of a jar, and a couple of the chairs have been upturned. And he also noticed that the mechanical clocks had stopped. And so he's thinking to himself, okay, something happened where they left in a hurry, because they toppled over chairs, they left food on the table, someone forgot their jacket. He continues moving through the lighthouse, and he gets to their bedrooms, and all of their beds are unmade. Again, it was kind of customary that you would never leave the lighthouse unmade. You would make your bed because someone else could be coming in to relieve you. And so it was yet another sign to Joseph Moore that something had happened suddenly that caused the lighthouse keepers to abandon the lighthouse. Combining that with the massive damage from the storm, he's starting to think, you know, something happened, you know, this horrible storm is coming through. Like, maybe it got really bad really quickly and they didn't have time to make proper preparations. They didn't have time to do the things that were customary. They just had to kind of boogie out of there. So Joseph Moore returns to Captain Harvey and says, this is what I saw. And so Captain Harvey and the crew go back up and they kind of see it for themselves. And Captain Harvey ends up sending a telegram back to the mainland explaining that there has been a horrible tragedy here. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. After Captain Harvey sends this telegram, he and Joseph Moore and the rest of the crew continue to kind of search the island and do some investigating. And they discover the logbook that the 3 lighthouse keepers had been keeping. And so all of the entries are pretty standard. It was, you know, common practice that you would mark down what happened that day, what ships you saw, you know, just kind of basic log keeping of the lighthouse. But they start getting really interesting on December 12th. On December 12th, the leader of the 3 lighthouse keepers noted that severe winds, the likes of which he had never seen before, he's been doing this for decades, are passing through the island. And he's acting pretty worried about whether or not the lighthouse will be able to withstand this storm. He also noted that the other 2 lighthouse keepers were not doing well. He said one of them had been basically just praying nonstop. The other had been doing a bit of crying. Now, the man he's describing that is crying over the intensity of the storm was known on the mainland as one of the toughest, saltiest men like on the planet, who had weathered dozens of hurricanes out on islands all by himself. And so for him to be crying over the severity of the storm just shows you how severe the storm really was. The entries on the 13th and 14th point to them believing that they're not going to get out of the storm alive. At this point, all three of them are just praying nonstop and are kind of anticipating at some point they're just going to get swept off the island. Then on December 15th, it just says, storm ended, sea is calm, God is over all. So Robert Moorhead, who is one of the leaders of the investigation, said that basically on December 15th, after that final entry was made, they must have gone down to the dock to secure some of the supplies and just kind of make sure that it wasn't totally damaged from all of the storm, and a rogue wave from this storm must have swept them away. When word got to the Scottish mainland about what had happened to these lighthouse keepers, the people that sat on the coast facing Eilean Moor, they were really confused, because whenever there's a storm out at Eilean Moor, they can see it because the island's not that far off the coast and they can see the storm. But over the past few days, namely December 12th to the 15th, which was the time period those log entries were made about the storm passing through, the people on the mainland of Scotland said that not only was there no storm, but in fact, the visibility onto Eilean Moor was better than it had been in years. They saw parts of the island that were only visible in perfect circumstances, meaning there was never any storm. So what the heck happened to those lighthouse keepers? What were those log entries about? Why were they drawn to tears? How did the railings get flipped over and the boulder get moved aside? Where did they go? In the years following their disappearance, other keepers were sent out to man that lighthouse, and all of them reported hearing someone yelling the names of the 3 lighthouse keepers that went missing. So pretty creepy stuff. And unfortunately, it's still very much an unsolved mystery, despite the official statement by Robert Moorhead. And so I'd love to hear in the comments what you think might have happened to the lighthouse keepers, and what could possibly explain that there wasn't a storm, but in the journal they said it was the worst storm ever, and there's physical damage done to the island. How do we reconcile that? Like, either someone's not telling the truth or something just doesn't add up. And I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. So if you haven't already, please like this video and hit subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. Thank you all so much, and I'll talk to you soon.